Bring out your dead. Golpe morte. Any way you want to slice it. We're talking death today. Not just any death. Not the purple death. Not the maroon death. Not the chartreuse death.
Not the red death. Not the Red Dead Redemption.
No.
Not the Red Scare.
The Black Death. The Black Plague. The bubonic plague. However you want to slice it.
And really, Chris and I found out that you just got to call it the plague.
Yeah, so people probably know this. This is something we learned. But when they say plague, it is literally just this one. There's multiple versions of how this plague actually shows itself as far as symptoms and how it attacks the body. But it's all caused by this one bacterium, Yersinia pestis. That's what actually caused the Black Plague. And it's caused a multitude of other instances of plague throughout the rest of the world. But when people are kind of thinking about like, oh, when they're talking about something, it was a plague upon society, they just we were talking about how we kind of viewed it as any illness that decimated a place with like that place suffered from plague. It's this one thing that actually causes it.
Pandemics and epidemics can be any sort of sickness that happens and kills a bunch of people.
Yes.
The plague is just literally the Black Plague.
Yeah, exactly. And the level of death that this brought to, I won't even say destruction because it didn't. It's one of those things. It's not a war. It's this unseen force that can infiltrate at any time and just leaves no rhyme or reason in its wake. And it doesn't destroy the crops. It doesn't destroy the buildings or anything like that. But it's just killing off this entire society throughout Asia and Europe and Africa.
The wild thing about it is we're talking about a time that it'll come up later, like 500 plus years before we really have like a modern understanding of germ theory.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't even have an understanding of how this is killing you, it's got to be the biggest.
It's God. God is punishing.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's the prevailing theory. Oh, God's upset.
There's no way to explain it. At least nowadays, when we have something that hits, there's scientists that can explain it. And the treatments that we're going to talk about just prove how much they didn't know about what they were trying to deal with.
It's when you factor in like the numbers and everything about what it did to that section, half the world, I guess, because the only thing we're not really talking about is we're not talking Australia, we're not talking the Americas at the time, and we're not talking Antarctica, but every place else on the planet is affected by this.
Well, the only reason that we're not talking about it is just because they hadn't been discovered yet. Had they already been discovered, we definitely would have been talking about it.
That's true. Yeah,
in those places.
Thank God that they hadn't figured that out, because it would have made its way over here.
Yeah,
because it made its way everywhere.
It has. I don't know if it has or it's just been prevalent, but there's Yersinia pestis in South America. There's Yersinia pestis in North America. It's there.
Yeah.
So it's either been transmitted eventually somehow from Europe, or it's just a naturally occurring bacteria.
It's been dormant and it hasn't had that chance to jump. And the world at this point, and the reason why there have been plagues previously, but we don't hear a lot about them, is simply because the world was in a position that the transmission vector, so the ways in which it was spread, were not available to really spread this thing out before it could kill itself off, or before it killed everything off that would actually host it or be able to spread through it. So the world has gotten to a point where it's really just this perfect storm of factors that allow this thing to just sweep across, and not even in 7 years, man. From 1346 to 1353, this is when it does its work, and it just leaves. I don't even know how to describe it. The world looks so different after.
And it's, like you say, it's kind of a product of human evolution, because we didn't have massive city centers for a very long time. Mm-hmm. We didn't have international trade routes. The Silk Road was a major spreader of this just on land, because every time your caravan would stop, it would just go a little further and a little further. And everybody might die in that caravan, but then the next caravan that pulls into that town ends up getting infected and moves it another. They're playing leapfrog.
Who's going to walk past a caravan that has supplies on it and is like, I'm not going to take these supplies, and not knowing what's in them.
Yeah, not knowing that there's other rats that are like, oh, good, more food.
Yeah, exactly. Full disclosure as well, we are not virologists. We are literally, we're sitting in armchairs. We are armchair historians in regards to this, so we're going to do our best. But if you've ever listened to this podcast before, you know we may get one or two things incorrect, but for the most part, we're covering as we research it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a product of us just literally cramming. There's just certain things that we can't get to. There's certain things that we can't dive deeper into.
We crammed it up our cram holes.
Exactly.
Okay, well, without waiting too much longer for you guys to go ahead and get into this, just remember, anywhere you listen to your podcast, click on that highest rating. It's easy for you to do, and it means a lot to us. You got anything else?
No, let's jump into the death.
Okay, so like you said, this Yersinia pestis, this isn't just a newly occurring thing. It's not something that just pops up that kind of, in the way that we think of global pandemics, things like that, we're kind of like, oh, this thing just it just got out and it's infecting everyone. This has always been a thing.
Yeah, and I think the way that my mind has to kind of work with this is a lot like what we talk about with war, because there's wars that we talk about that feel almost more personal, that have 30,000 deaths.
Yeah,
and then there's World War I and World War II where it's triple digit numbers, and you just have to look at it and be like, oh God, that's terrible.
Or the 30,000 was a battle.
Yeah, it's like your mind can't quite wrap yourself around it. What's the saying? One death is a tragedy, 100,000 deaths is a statistic.
Or a million deaths is a statistic. Yeah, something like that.
And so the emotion for this for me is just like, this is a World War I level sickness.
With not nary a shot being fired.
Yeah. So... But you also have these other ancient times, because this is just a bacteria. This is something that's naturally occurring. There's also another bacteria that they found at play during this time that, to me, I had no idea I thought it was just engineered in a lab, but it's anthrax. Anthrax is just something that's naturally occurring in nature that
has been weaponized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like mustard gas.
You can, mustard gas, you have to combine shit, don't you?
But you can still get natural elements. You're just simply you're synthesizing it basically, I guess.
Yeah. There are just these bacteriums that are naturally occurring that can catch on and kill people. And anthrax was kind of, during this time, the excavations that they've done and the research that they've done on these skeletons, they've found signs of both of these issues.
Was it next to like an envelope?
Yeah, it was just white powder in the graves. So even before the Black Plague really became prevalent and we get the Black Death, the
Black Death is kind of the thing that's centered around not just Europe, but imagine a giant sphere that's kind of like, when they talk about the Black Death, the mentions of essentially like China and that kind of stuff is either the origination point for it or somewhere within Asia, but it's kind of almost centered around like Northern Africa, that world of Northern Africa, Italy, Constantinople, the rest of Europe, Scandinavia, places like that is really essentially where it gets to the show. That's where the Black Death gets to the show.
Yeah. And they didn't call it the Black Death back then. They considered it the pestilence.
Yes, there was a bunch of different names for it, but it was never the Black Death. It might have not even been the plague because that was determined, later on.
Yeah, we attributed it later on.
But I also kind of thinking of like, what are the four horsemen of the apocalypse? It's famine, war, pestilence. Can't remember the fourth one. But you'll see where people, it's just blaming stuff on what causes a bad crop or a disease or something like that. Oh, it's divinity.
But we're talking all the way back into the Bronze Age when there's actually human evidence that Yersinia pestis was around. So from 3300 to 1200 BCE, we are finding evidence that Yersinia pestis was prevalent along kind of this Eurasian area. But at the same time, we're talking about a time when these were just nomads that were out on the land, that weren't having talks and conversations with other places of population. So if you get Yersinia pestis that just runs its route through a nomadic tribe and they drop dead there, there's a chance that that's never going to be spread anywhere else.
Exactly. And the essentially the evidence of it isn't like, oh, like a nomadic horseman wrote down, hey, there's plague here. This is essentially like biologically looking into like their remains and everything like that, where they're testing shit that they can do nowadays and finding like, oh, the remnants of this bacteria are here. So we can assume that it was prevalent. That's why it caused, plague, whatnot.
There's something in their DNA that shows that there's markers that they had a deficiency in this because of this. But these strains also kind of look like they lacked the genetic components for like flea transmission. So this may have just literally been something that it was in an area that they were populating in. The animals were eating the grass. That was how it jumped through that. Because again, we'll talk about those 3 different ways that they kind of...
So it's kind of like the plague isn't ready yet. Yersinia pestis isn't ready for the show. Civilization isn't ready for it. They meet together eventually, and both are ready to just, kick this thing off.
2,000 more years of evolutionary time for Yersinia pestis. It's going to get more effective in what it does.
Civilization as well as transmitting stuff, yeah.
There was a possible arrival in the Roman Empire during the 1st century. And the reason that we say possible is, again, you can find these genetic markers in these remains. At the same time, the Roman Empire was so rife with sickness because they were going everywhere.
They were bringing in a little bit of everything.
Yeah. The first really known plague that we talk about, or part of the plague, was in the 6th century in the Byzantine Empire. It was known as the Justinian plague. We talked about that during the Constantinople episode. Justinian had more than a few different issues with his reign, but that was, I think, kind of the big overarching one.
Is a biggie.
Yeah. 7th century Chinese doctors started describing these malignant buboes. And a bubo is just basically where your lymph nodes are. It's a gathering of infection.
And it swells them to like incredible size. So this is where you get like when people are thinking about the plague, or you're seeing it in fucking Monty Python and the people come out and they have the sores and the swollen stuff. That may have happened, but the buboes would actually appear where your actual lymph nodes. So you get people that on their necks, they were so swollen that it was forcing their neck to actually turn the other direction. And like underneath like your arms where your lymph nodes are, you would get swelling there, and you would get these huge raised buboes. And that's where we get the term. Do you think it was bubonic before, or because of the buboes, it was bubonic? Like, I don't know if it's a chicken before the egg scenario.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about with these different forms of transmission, like their etymology with their words, we don't exactly know which one came first.
Yeah.
But these buboes were always accompanied with high fever. They were maybe traveling from the east, from Constantinople, where the Justinian plague had happened.
Because that was also, like we're talking Silk Road, areas of trade routes, things like that. A city like Constantinople is going to be a major stop. And so both coming and going.
Yeah, you're right there on the water, too. So you're transferring stuff by boat. I don't know where the exploration was, but they had to have gone further east.
So you could just go, because Constantinople is on the far western portion of the Black Sea. You can go all the way over to the other side of the Black Sea and be in Eurasia. Also, when a city is racked by plague like that, it's not just like, oh, we're just going to sit and wait it out. And you do get some people, so you're still going to get people like, oh, we need to, get the fuck out of this city. They're not just going north, or they're not just going west. It's like, no, we're going to go back where we possibly came from, or we're going to go, east. And so you can just take it back maybe the direction it came from.
And it doesn't take, but another 100 years for it to make it there. 14th century outbreaks, they believe, kind of started in Central Asia around the 1330s in what's current-day Kyrgyzstan. The Asian numbers are a little bit different because the Yuan dynasty, or the Yuan dynasty, was in charge. They were the Mongols that were in charge. This is the great Khans that are in the area. And just looking at these numbers, we didn't check when the Yuan dynasty was, but in 1200, China's population was somewhere around 120 million. A census that was taken in 1393 left 65 million people in China.
And this is after the Black Plague.
After the Black Plague came through and really smashed things. So they believe, again, 25 million people died in Asia from the Black Plague. But just to show, how tough the Mongols were on the Chinese Empire. almost half of their population is gone by the end of the Yuan dynasty or the Yuan dynasty.
And this is also at a point where after the Great Khan, I'm trying to remember if, I know Genghis was considered one of the Great Khans. I don't know if it was like Kublai or one of his sons who the last Great Khan but there eventually came a time when you had, it was a Khanate or something like that, but it was basically just in the same vein of Alexander the Great. Once Alexander died, all of his generals were just like, so we just divided up.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of did the same thing after the Great Khan died, where you had these segments of, Asia that were taken over. One of the closest ones to what would be considered like Western or, Western Asia, Europe, things like that. That's going to be under the purview of what's considered the Golden Horde, correct?
Very cool name.
Yeah.
I like the Golden Horde a lot. Mongol trading routes actually might have saved Europe sooner than we thought, because as the Mongols moved their way down into Southeast Asia and then into North Africa, they would convert to Islam. So if you convert to Islam, you cut off Christian trading routes.
Mm-hmm.
You're right next door to Russia. Had you continued those trading routes into Russia, you definitely would have continued to spread Yersinia Pestis into Russia, and then Russia would have spread it into Europe.
Yeah.
Instead, you went the other way. You went southwest, and you took it into the Islamic Empire because that's who you were trading with along these Silk Roads.
I think the way that it ends up coming in is going to be the most advantageous for it, because if it does work its way into Russia, because we do find at the tail end of it, it tries to work its way into Russia.
It goes full circle.
It would have been... Russia is one of those areas, much like Africa at this point, where everything is so spread out. There are, metropolitan centers where more people are, but the distance between these areas is going to be further. You're also dealing with general December,
winter.
February, or December, January, and February, to where weather can actually prevent this thing from spreading because you're killing essentially the things that are carrying it. And so I think it would have been a little slower going through Russia, but I still feel like the way, just like you said, once it got there, it might have crept along, but it's still then being able to attack from the north as well.
It's incredible how some things end up it's like, okay, well, good. It didn't come into Russia that way. But then by the time you get to 53 and it's in Russia, it's like, we got it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about that a couple different instances where some people feel like they could have been saved and then they are punished for other things. But getting back into the story, like we say, it moved down into the Islamic regions after these trades with the Christians are cut off. By 1347, and chronologically, we're going to bounce around a little bit. This is just kind of a region area right now. We're talking about the Islamic region. By 1347, Alexandria, Cairo, and the rest of Egypt have been infected by Yersinia Pestis. And these numbers are absolutely amazing. Cairo lost an estimated 200,000 people, or 40% of the city's population.
Yeah. It at its peak, 10 to 15,000 people are dying daily in Cairo. This one thing we're going to kind of probably go off on these little tangents is when we talk about these death rates and the numbers. It's not just like, on a battlefield, like Stalingrad, something like that. Yeah, you have all these bodies out there and everything, but you're also having soldiers try to kind of clear some of these, this is a situation where what do you do when you have 10 to 15,000 people dying daily trying to get these things from clogging the city?
Yeah. And just by the morbidity of these numbers, if you have 200,000 people that died from it, and you're 10 to 15,000 a day, there's a point in time where you have like a week where it's just literally 10,000 bodies stacking up every single day of that week.
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, it shows you just how quickly this hits and how quickly it tears through a population. Mm-hmm. And I mean, what do you do with 10,000 bodies a day? You have carts. Like you say, bring out your dead style carts where they're loading these people up and taking them out. You also have to have people out there digging these pits that are constantly coming in contact with these bodies that are getting rid of them. And to me, it's just one of those things where it's like the problem, if it's 200 people a day that are dying, still a lot of people, still an issue. But you can get those people out of the city much faster to stop the potential of the spread from going.
Yeah, but where do you go? Like my Egyptian geography isn't exactly probably up to snuff, but I would imagine trying to get out of Cairo, it's probably some distance before you're getting to someplace else.
Yeah, probably a lot of desert.
So, and again, we're going to kind of jump around on this because there's regional stuff, there's stuff chronologically that happens, there's treatments, there's ways it's spread. Just to kind of go back a little bit into the methods in which this thing spreads, because right now there's probably some, is it airborne? Is it in the water? Is it something like that? This thing all boils down to essentially fleas and black rats. Now, the rats themselves could go ahead and carry this, but it's not like rats are biting or anything like that. Rats are simply essentially the preferred mode of transportation for these fleas that are actually carrying this Yersinia pestis. And these black rats, essentially, they evolved somewhere within kind of Asia, and they're about half the size of brown rats. Now, they can actually, almost climb vertically up walls. They can fit through a 1/4-inch opening. These things can survive a 5-story fall. They're very resilient. And each of them, I think, can carry, they said, like up to like 5 fleas, which seems like a small number, but I guess fleas are pretty decently sized. And if it's carrying too many and they're feeding off of it, these fleas are probably going to actually kill this thing. So there has to be some type of balance to it. So these rats that are essentially coming in with shipments that are following armies that are basically being spread anywhere humans are spreading out to as well. These fleas actually carried the Yersinia pestis bacterium. And the way that this actually processed through the fleas is it would actually block up its gut.
So gross.
Preventing it from actually digesting the blood, because that's how a flea survives. It's biting and it's actually drinking the blood. If a flea is biting and trying to drink blood, but it's being prevented from actually like getting this into its digestive system, it's going to be like, I need to keep drinking blood. And so you're getting multiple bites, and every bite is actually spreading this, whether that's biting a rat or that's jumping onto something else and biting it. It's doing this multiple times, which is increasing essentially the chances of this thing spreading.
And you're also puking back up of the blood that's not making it back into the system because it's
into the wounds and everything. Yeah. Exactly. Fleas of this nature, they call them essentially the rat flea, could survive for more than a month without a host. So just living in, like you said, it kills all the rats within a shipment, and it's just sitting there within the canvas or the clothing and things. Someone comes along, it's like, oh, unattended shipment, I'm grabbing this. All of a sudden, now it has a new way of actually getting someplace. It can live on almost any surface. They can jump 1/2 meter, which that's just fucking creepy.
This is the itchiest episode that we've ever done.
Oh yeah, this is the episode where like every so often I'm just going to touch the chair and be like, oh, what the fuck is on this thing? But this is the way that these things are spreading. And so when you have these black rats that are able to basically get anywhere into ships, things like that, carrying these fleas, you're now not just at the speed of the rats. You're at the speed in which humans are actually transporting these things, unknowingly, of course, but it's going to be much faster than these rats could actually go by themselves. And that plays into essentially this perfect storm type scenario where all of a sudden we have population expansion that's happened because of our ability to travel further. More goods and services are being sent, and because they're being shipped, via the water, it's able to get more places. It's able to get more places faster. And, cities are being overcrowded in some areas. And I think a lot of this is more to do with the European portion of it. But you have overcrowding in cities due to things like previous famines. Yeah. All of a sudden, out in the countryside, famines are happening. People aren't able to survive out there. Everyone tries to find work within the city or places to live within the city. And once the famine stops, you might have some people going back out to do this stuff, but some of them actually stay in the city. Cities at this point aren't designed for these huge influxes of populations. And because of that, you're getting this huge lack of sanitation. You're getting shit, like literally people, this is when you see in like the old fucking movies in London where people are dumping shit buckets out their fucking windows into the gutters onto the streets.
Chamber pots, you better hope you're not on the sidewalk.
It got so bad with like all of the fucking just waste in the streets that by the 14th century, certain streets had names that were based on shit. I think mierda is one of the words for it. And if you look in France, there were a bunch of streets that were actually named with like shit within the name itself. That's, I mean, like so on the nose, like a neighborhood, like Soho in New York or things
Yeah.
like that. They're like, what neighborhood do you live in? They're like, I live in shit acres,
Diarrhea.
diarrhea estates, something like that. You're also getting some places where literal livestock are roaming the streets, places like London and Paris, that you have chickens and horses and cows and pigs and shit just on the street, shitting, creating. This is a fucking dream scenario for rats.
Yeah, all those mammals that Chris just mentioned are all susceptible to flea bites, which means they're all susceptible to the plague too. And there's a difference between having a rat fall over and die in the middle of a street than having a piece of livestock die in the middle of the street.
And then someone's going up to it and they're touching it, and all of a sudden that flea jumps onto them and they take it in their house, and everyone else in the house is getting bit.
Yeah, it turns out if a cow dies in the middle of the street, rats have a ton of other things to eat as well.
Yeah, no kidding. Like I was saying before, trade routes, both overland and seas, because they're more established, makes travel so much faster. And then prior to kind of leading up to when this thing is really going to pop off, you get this crazy population expansions. I know I talked about famines, but after famines happen, you get other scenarios where it swings the other direction and you get good growing seasons. And guess what? It doesn't take more than a couple great harvest seasons for people to be like, oh, we can start fucking again.
Yeah.
And making a larger population, because now we have food in order to do that. And so now you get this population expansion. These already overcrowded cities are getting more overcrowded. And it's just this simmering fucking stew of just like waiting for the right disease to come through.
Yeah. And as Chris talked about, the transport is so important. And I think up until fairly recently, until we've actually had the technology to be able to look at this kind of stuff, it was believed that Yersinia pestis just didn't make it past the Sahara Desert to sub-Saharan countries in Africa because it's...
How could it?
Yeah.
It's the desert. People can hardly make it across there.
But this bacterium's going to spread.
Yeah. Land, they can maybe not make it over there, but guess what? Just fucking sail around it. Like we've been doing.
Yeah, we got boats. It may not have happened at the same time that the Black Death happened, but Yersinia pestis has reached further down into sub-Saharan Africa than I think anybody ever really realized until we were able to look at this. But in the 14th century, whether it's later in the 14th century or during this point in time, you have areas of both the east and the west coast of Africa, in Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, Madagascar, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Yersinia pestis is found. And these patterns of these mass populations and collapse that they've seen in the historical records of these areas prove that there had to have been a mass killer that happened there.
And also, think of how many of these civilizations in Africa had accurate record keeping.
Yeah. We're a victim of record keeping.
Exactly. And we're sitting here saying, like, we can only piece together the final death toll of this based upon kind of what the records show, what we can go back and find for like population record harvest seasons. Like, there's so many weird ways that they go back and try to determine these populations. But how do you determine a population of a city or a village or a tribe that picked this thing up where it killed 80% of them? 60% of them, and then the rest died out because they didn't have enough population to keep it going. And then you never hear from them.
Yeah, not easy to find mass graves if it kills everybody before they can be buried.
Yeah, exactly, and they're isolated from the rest of society. So, I mean, I do believe that the death toll on this is probably much higher than is actually stated, just because it definitely got to areas that aren't really a focal point.
Well, just to talk about this area even more and how it's still something that's prevalent. In 2007, there was a plague outbreak in Madagascar, 2,000 cases and 200 deaths. In 2017, I don't know if I said 2007 the first time, but 2017, we have 2,000 cases breaking out in Madagascar and still 200 people dying. Just to get back into the right time period and to talk about some of these other major cities that are hit. Summer of 1348. So we're talking about we're full in it in the Islamic area, full into the Black Death. Syria at its peak had 2,000 deaths a day. So these Islamic centers are getting hit. And we're talking about a time when there's not a whole lot of information sharing between the Islamic and the Christian world, but you still have rumors traveling to these other areas saying there's something very bad happening in these areas. There's a lot of people dying, and we don't know what it is, where it's coming from, or how to contain it.
Oh, they pissed off God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that what you think in the Christian world is, oh, well, they're Islamic people. Like, they're going to die that way.
100%. Come on. Come on, buddy.
Now, we've dove into the Islamic world. We've seen how it hit them. Europe to this point we haven't really talked about, but it doesn't take long because the Golden Horde that Chris mentioned earlier had some dealings with the Genoan people. They had sold them this port in the Black Sea, correct?
Yeah, so it would be currently, I believe, where Crimea is, the Crimean Peninsula. If you're looking at the Black Sea, the Crimean Peninsula is like right in the center, north, basically 12 o'clock. And it kind of dips out into the Black Sea. And on the southern portion of that, the Genoese are able to basically be like, hey, Golden Horde, do you mind if we kind of set up shop here and we can use it as a trading outpost, and we'll probably, we'll give you some good shit and we'll make sure we're paying you guys for it and everything. But it ends up, blowing up. This becomes an insanely huge trading hub for them. Enough so to where, God, I love this guy's name. A Khan named Johnny Beg. Janibeg. Johnny Beg. He sounds like a Fast and the Furious bad guy from one of the early movies.
He's a Mortal Kombat character that you had to unlock.
Yes. Johnny Beg. So Johnny Beg is basically like, hey, I could do what the Genoese are doing here. I could be actually making all this money and not splitting it. So he decides he's going to march down to Kaffa, where this is, and go ahead and take over the city, kick the Genoese out and kind of set up shop for himself. And unaware at the time, his army has actually contracted and is carrying with them plague.
Their first initial siege happens in 1343. Johnny doesn't quite know how the Genoese work. European defense systems and the walls that were built around Kaffa were pretty impenetrable. They were pretty apt at being able to fight themselves, because what do we have at this time? We got Greek fire, baby. So it's pretty easy to defend your walls when you can just put a chute over the wall and start pouring a flammable liquid down onto these people.
It's not just the wall. It's the wall of fire in front of the wall that's being lit anytime they get close enough to try to climb them or do anything like that.
Yeah, so the Golden Horde gets pushed back. They don't end up trying to re-engage until 1345. And their re-engagement the second time they come in is a lot more efficient. They know that they have to choke off the sea. They have to choke off Kaffa to make sure that they can't get resupplied. They have to try to starve the city. And it actually was fairly effective for a while, to the point to where the Genoese were like, shit, we got to get this figured out. This is a little bit more of an even fight than it was the first time they showed up.
And along with all of his troops and the caravan and the baggage train and all that kind of stuff that Johnny Beg pulls down, he's bringing the rats and the fleas with him. And as they're setting up and besieging Kaffa at this point, the rats aren't just staying in the camp and being like, hey, we're just doing here. They're crossing the fucking no man's land. They're getting through, like I said, these things can get through a quarter of an inch. They're getting through holes in the walls. They're scaling the walls to get in here and bringing these fleas into the city. All of a sudden, they're like, oh shit, a city under, do you think that regardless of what sanitation they had prior to the city being under siege, if you're not able to leave the city, it's going to get any better? So you have all of this shit getting in the street. It's a breeding ground. One thing that I didn't mention is two of these rats, these black rats, if they were to continually mate for 3 years through all of the branching, the pyramid scheme of rat fucking, I guess, you could get a population of 3 million rats.
And how long?
In 3 years. But that's two rats creating more rats that are then fucking each other and fucking it's an exponential rate of rats having sex with each other. 3 million. That's how quickly these things can spread. And as far as rats go, they're pretty smart because they'll establish a nest. The first thing they do is they find an escape point where they need to go before they're going out and trying to like do little recon missions to find food and everything. Well, if that's not enough, Johnny, who is having his soldiers drop dead from the plague, is like, this thing seems to be killing a lot of our guys. We could probably go ahead and use this, not only as a terror tactic, but as biological warfare. Load these corpses up in the catapults and start flinging them over the walls. These are bodies that are in various stages of decomposition that have had plague, multiple versions, not just the bubonic plague, but possibly the pneumonic, possibly what was the third one that I can never remember the name? The septicemic version. And as they're flinging these bodies at high speed over the walls and they're slamming into these stone buildings, these things are just exploding and just raining down all of the fucking chunks and all of this shit. And guess what? More fucking rat food. If there wasn't enough incentive to go in there in the first place, they're like, they're launching all our food over the... Okay, we just got to get into the city, I guess. And so you start to get this enclosed spread in Kaffa of the plague.
I want to give Johnny the credit that this was germ warfare for the first time. I really think that this was more mental warfare, because if I'm a Genoese soldier and I'm standing there and all of a sudden you hear as the catapult launches.
It's not a ball.
Yeah.
You don't notice that that thing's rotating weird and it's just a body fucking ass over tea kettle. Boom, 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 boom.
You see the hair flowing in the wind as it's coming. You're like, oh my God, they're launching people. They're launching assassins into the city.
Yeah.
These guys are going to land on the wall.
Splat against the wall. Okay, so they're not assassins. They're just launching their own fucking, like, psychologically, it was the bonus was the biological aspect of it. Psychologically, they're thinking, they're doing this to their own guys.
Yeah. Yeah, what are they going to do to us? Also, I think a big factor was, as the bodies are piling up outside, it's really starting to stink on those lines.
I don't even want to imagine this entire period.
Yeah, stinkiest period in time.
Yes.
It has to be. There's no question that this is...
And not just stinky in the sense of like, yeah, there's shit in the streets. A smell that probably 99.9% of people have never smelled in their lives, of just constant decay and death. Fucking, you don't get to use the term putrescence enough in just modern conversation, but just the most people had to have been just constantly vomiting on the streets, walking past shit too.
The best thing for you would be nose blind. That's like the best outcome for your life could be nose blind. At the same time, if you can launch the stink into a fortified area that they're locked into, eventually, like you say, if you've thrown up 10 billion times, you're just going to be like, all right, I give. All right, that's enough. White flag. I don't think that he quite knew that launching those bodies over there was going to be quite as biological. Maybe he did. Maybe he was that smart. But I think this was a terror tactic to try to get them to capitulate.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And after seeing their own guys get launched in, like you said, having that feeling of like, what are they going to do to us? We need to get on these ships and we need to get the fuck out of this city. Yeah. And so guess who's also been in the city for a while? These rats. They're getting into cargo. They're getting into all of this stuff that you would need to take with you in order to survive when you're evacuating the city. Rats are on the ships now. Not only that, but you have carriers of people that already have the plague that have maybe just been showing minor symptoms or no symptoms at all. And here's the other thing. Even if they get onto those ships without the plague, they're now in an enclosed area with all of the stuff that spreads it. So you get these ships that start leaving from Kaffa, these Genoese merchant ships, and after being under attack, they're probably going to try to stop at the closest friendly place that they can and get some assistance before traveling on even further.
You got to resupply.
Yeah. So one of the first places they actually stop is going to be kind of the exit point of the Black Sea, which is going to be Constantinople. You pull into Constantinople, hey, we just came from Kaffa, it's been taken over. They were launching fucking bodies at us. Can you believe this shit? And, what did you guys bring? Oh, we brought some food. We brought some, some of this merchandise and stuff like that. Do you guys want it? Oh, yeah, bring it into the city.
700 years after the first Yersinia plague.
God's not pissed at us now. It's been 700 years.
You're not thinking that whatever is happening down there could be reemerging in your society. 700 years is just long enough to forget about a massive tragedy that happens in your country or in your area.
They find out quick because during that little stop in Constantinople, once it's all said and done, the death rate from this specifically in Constantinople is going to be 50 to 70% of the population. And at this point, too, Constantinople being on, I believe, the northern side of the Bosphorus Straits, people evacuating the city, no one, it's not readily available for everyone to just jump on a ship and be like, hey, let's get out of here. You're going to start heading inland. So now you're spreading it overland north toward Europe. People that are crossing the Bosphorus are then bringing that even more so into essentially, the Islamic Empire and, the Middle East and all of that kind of stuff. And it's not just stopping over land because it's going to be traveling much slower. The Genoese are like, oh, our bad. We're going to keep going. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and head out. So they head through the Bosphorus. And now guess what? All of these plague ships are out in the Aegean, and they're going to start making stops as well.
Yeah. And this is the tentacles of the Black Death that are spreading. This is, we've started out in an area in Kaffa. We've rolled up, we've landed in the Byzantine Empire. That's just one big tentacle coming out from the Byzantine Empire. Now, as we're sending a massive amount of ships, we are going to start hitting different ports in different times. And Italy is kind of like the next step up. You went from southeastern Greece and the Byzantine Empire, sort of in that area, you'd say.
So you come out into the Aegean. Of course, you're going to stop by places in Greece. Mm-hmm. It's going to hit there first. I think some might have wrapped around and gone to, I always forget. It starts with an L. What do they? Levant.
Levant.
Yep. So Levant being essentially the Holy Land is what they considered it. You're going to be going into the Levant, and then Alexandria is right there. It's not that far from Greece. So you're going to be heading down. You're going to be heading into Africa. And once you get into these areas, you're spreading it a little bit more, but then you're also, it's not like ships aren't leaving now. All of a sudden, ships that have picked up this stuff, the Aegean at this point, there's a map called the catamaran. It's not catamaran. It's this map that was designed back in kind of antiquity, or might be a little bit later, but it just basically shows the Mediterranean and all of like the shipping routes and everything. It looks like a giant, just crisscrossed grid.
It's a web.
And that's all it is. And so every time it's not like they just stop somewhere and they just run out of plague. It's not a video game where it has a plague meter and every stop you make, it's just like, oh, the plague meter is going down. No, you're just perpetuating that, and it's spreading everywhere. Greece finds its way over into Sicily.
Messina.
Yep.
Messina port was a massive drop-off. And you land in port, you're not having to worry about unloading all of your shit. All of your... you're throwing the lines out as soon as those lines hit land, as soon as the rats have eaten everything that they can on the ship. Mm-hmm. They're running down those rope lines.
Not only that, they're in boxes. They're in crates. Yeah, they're in stuff being pulled off the ship.
Well, if you're shipping, yes, back and forth. But initially, these ships that are leaving Genoa, all they have to do is just stop and throw their lines out for these rats to be hit. They don't even have to step on land, and they are basically spreading what they just carried.
Someone wearing clothes that has a flea attached to them is walking into the tavern and is sitting there to have a drink or something.
And it's just that fast.
So 1347 is when it hits Messina. Now, Messina being on Sicily, it's an island. It's got the little separation from the boot of Italy. It spreads through Sicily, and I think the death rate in Sicily was about 33%. So in the end, Sicily loses a third of its population.
And this is going to shock you guys when we say this. 33%, low.
When it comes to this, 33% is low. They kind of have estimated through studies the travel distance of this thing daily. It could travel up to 2.5 miles a day. Or not, sorry, an average of 2.5. So you had some places where it was being taken by carriage, wagon, things like that, where it could get 10 or 15 miles a day. But kind of the average was 2.5 miles daily, which is still a pretty significant distance for this thing to actually spread.
Yeah, and that's including into the average spreading through a city.
Yeah, exactly.
So blocks at that point, it's moving just further daily.
Mm-hmm. It reaches Rome. It's able to jump that little area, that little spit of water, and jump over into Italy. It just starts working its way up. It reaches Rome within a few months. And as these ships that are bringing it in, and they finally make the connection after people start dying, they're like, okay, let's try to track it back. What happened just recently? A bunch of ships came in, and guess what? There were dead fucking people on the ships. Okay, well, get them out of here. Ships are having to leave, and they're just making their way to. They keep making their way to other places.
I don't mean to point this out. How do you think? How common do you think it was for a ship to roll up with a dead body on it?
A dead body?
Yeah,
common.
So I guess maybe what your line is like, if it has more than 3 dead bodies, it's suspicious. Because there's going to be one guy that's probably going to freak out and be an asshole. He's going to end up getting stabbed. They're probably not going to throw him overboard.
Nah.
If there's a rebellion or a revolt, there's probably going to be more dead bodies, but that's just an isolated ship.
I think maybe they have a guy I like to imagine a guy that comes on with a clipboard.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, what are you guys doing for cargo? And they're like, okay, it's this and this and this. He's like, any dead bodies you guys need to declare? And they're like, 3 from a stabbing. One guy actually got choked in his sleep. They're like, okay, can you show us those? And they see him. They're like, any other ones? They're like, we got these 6 other random dead bodies, but we're really not sure what killed them. And they uncover them, and they just got fucking buboes, and they got discoloration and everything. And they're like, that's not fucking normal.
So the dead body isn't the shot or the part that raises the red flag. It's how the dead body
manner in
look.
which the body is. Yeah, I think that's more so what it is. It takes them long enough for Sicily to get 33% of their people killed before they're like, and this isn't like 33% died. They finally turn back to the ships like, get out of here. As soon as people start kicking the bucket, they're like, yeah, you kind of showed up at a suspect time with a bunch of these corpses, so we're going to need you to leave.
And the way that it moves along the coast is just, it's going to end up moving on land. But you're hitting these coastal cities because ports are moving faster. Like you were talking about how fast it was moving on land. Mm-hmm. You're in ships that are going 30, 40, 50 miles a day to get places. So it's going to happen a lot faster. If it takes you 2 weeks to get to a city on land and it takes you 5 days to get to a city by boat, it's just getting the disease there faster.
Whenever we've talked about like the Silk Road, East India Trading Company, ships were always built bigger. And they wanted to transport stuff on the water because, like, we can get so much more stuff. This is one of those situations. Is like, yeah, you're able to transport so much more plague when you have these ships. Chickens do come home to roost in November of 1347 because the plague actually finds its way to Genoa. Population around that time 90,000, and when it's all said and done for that city, 30 to 40% of them are dead. And as it just keeps hitting these coastal areas, it's not just working its way up, the Roman boot. Marseille in France becomes a major entry point for the plague to enter France. It reaches Avignon by 1348. So by the new year, it's already kind of up into France. And January 1948, it hits Venice. Venice gets hit hard. 60% of the population dies, 72,000 people in Venice die. And Venice is a very unique challenge because of the simple lack of roads in Venice. So much like you'd be like, we need a lot more wagons to transport all these dead bodies. They're like, we need a lot more gondolas to transport these dead bodies. And they would have guys, I doubt they're, singing the songs like they do with the gondolas now, but taking these gondolas down these little waterways between buildings, basically, corpe morte, which is bring out your dead, essentially. And people were literally coming to the windows with these bodies and just dumping bodies out of the buildings into these gondolas, which, if you've ever been in a canoe, I know gondolas are probably much more stable, but if you're trying to dump a body out of a second-story window into these things, how many times do you think it hit the side of this thing, threw the weight off, and all of a sudden the guy gets pitched into the water, dumping all of the other dead bodies into the water with him?
Or just how many times did they miss?
Yeah.
You're throwing a full-sized human dead body out a 2-story window.
He just points up to the window. You're getting that. You need to come down and fish that thing out and get it back up in here.
That's probably unintended benefit of having the long poles for the gondolas to push them along is you can just reach out and kind of scrape the body towards
the guy that's trying to get it into the boat. You're like, here, this is as much as I'm going to help you.
Yeah, it's that. To me, it just never ever crossed my mind that would be how it would be. But if you're in Venice, and again, if you have a lot of people that are dying, you need to get them out of the city as quick as possible. The only way that you're going to be able to do that is just by hucking them out the window into the water.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder what the current is in those. Like, if it just floats there for a couple days. There were a few different styles of getting rid of these bodies, and we'll kind of talk about that probably a little bit more in depth. But this one was hilarious to me. In places, and I'm sure this took place in other places in Europe and everything like that, but they used the lasagna method, where they would just dig a huge hole, line it with bodies, then throw a layer of dirt over it. Then more bodies on top of it, noodles, sauce, cheese, noodles, sauce, cheese, going all the way up. So that was one method. I didn't hear a lot about burning. Did you hear a lot about burning bodies?
That's intentional, because they believed, along with this spread, in something called miasma. Miasma was the belief of bad air.
Foul vapors that occurred.
So if you're burning it and you're burning these dead bodies that are infected, you get foul air.
So the one thing that could have actually been kind of a saving grace in at least trying to mitigate the spread of this thing was something that they were terrified of.
Fire kills the bacteria. And it turns out that, I believe it was Pope Clement that we'll talk about later, knew that fire was a good way to kill the bacteria. Just as you were talking about January 1348 in Venice, just weeks later, you have a massive outbreak in Pisa. So we're not talking about a matter of like a month or two later. We're talking about just a couple weeks. It shows up in an area to where it's moving along the coastline because Pisa is, again, right there on the water or close to the water.
Just thinking about it, like how you see in some movies that they talk about, like where they'll show the little graphic and it'll show the arrows pointing and like the spread of the color across something. So from the standpoint of like, let's say you just have the ships that make it out of Kaffa. They go to Constantinople. You have 3 ships, just for argument's sake, come out of Kaffa. Constantinople, that turns into 6 ships. Those guys sail out in each port they hit. They spread it to 3 or 4 other ships. You now have pretty much any and all ships crisscrossing and traveling throughout the Mediterranean, then up the coast of Europe and everything. Everyone is now a potential spreader of this. It's still not just isolated to these ships. Everything is a transmission vector for this.
Yeah. And we're talking about January 1348. By June 1348, it has hit port cities in France, Spain, Portugal, and England. So in a matter of 6 months, we are in all of these other countries.
It's already popped up in Paris, I think, by like later in 1348. Paris has a population at that point of 210,000 people, and in 1 year, they lose 50% of that population to plague.
1 year. That's just amazing.
Sacre bleu.
Once it hits land, after it hits these port cities, it's very clear how that progression goes. Any goods that are pulled off of ships will then be brought into the ports. The ports are then full of rats. The rats will then follow all of the commodities and all the goods that are coming off of these into the ports.
Not only spreading the cities to animals, other animals that can transport them. Do fleas live on horses? Is this a long hair, short hair thing? I'm going to look because that would think of if you didn't just were traveling with a wagon with goods and everything. If it was just horses in general, that in itself is an insanely quick way to send this stuff.
Well, but if they're not chewing on the livestock, they're chewing on all of the grain that was brought in on that ship. And it doesn't have to be a very long period. We'll talk about this 23 days number, that it's so scary to think that in 23 days, just how the life cycle of this thing can hit and go from literally the black rats to a human death in less than a month blows me away. It starts to spread east and north through Germany, and Germany gets hit pretty hard. Germany does what Germany would do later in history through that time period. But if you're in England, it's only a matter of time until you get to Scotland.
Okay, I want to talk about this England thing because I love it. But first, let's take a bathroom break.
Okay.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Ooh, tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's Historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At Historically High Podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. All right. Jolly old England. So this is, it would have got there eventually.
Yeah.
But the way that it got there and the timing that it got there was very much, I believe, a self-inflicted wound. So surprise, surprise, 1348, a couple years earlier, England and France had been at war. I know, shocking, right? If you're ever
stop us if you've heard this story before.
If you're ever in any type of like trivia game where you have to answer a question and someone's like, hey, in this year were England and France at war, if you don't know for sure, 50-50 chance, yes or no, you're going to get it right. Because that's how frequently they were fighting against each other.
You have 100-year window. You have a whole century that you could
Not
guess.
only that, didn't you then have a 10 years war? And then, the 100 wasn't good enough for you guys. You had to add in little minor ones.
Still just a full century that you could say any year in.
Yep. So England had beat France, and as one does, you gather the spoils of war. So as you're conquering these areas of France and everything, you're sending all of this shit back up to the northern coast of France, like Calais, areas like that, that were just little hops across the English Channel to start bringing all that loot across. Well, as you're working your way through France, the plague is also there. And there are, when your town is actually dealing with any type of outbreak of plague, you're supposed to like fly a flag from a visible portion that shows, hey, this is a plague town. Probably don't come through here.
Sick.
Yeah. I'm guessing they're still moving through there because there's shit that they're trying to gather and loot. And as they're bringing all this stuff together and consolidating it to send it across the English Channel, of course, these big baggage trains are having to carry food and all that stuff. They start picking up rats. They start picking up fleas, all that stuff. And by the time they start to send stuff over, they're sending it to multiple ports within England. And it ends up getting hit along the Channel coast and then just starts spreading its way in. Now, they had a 55% average death rate in cities. London, 50%. So they got away a little bit easier. But by the late, I was going to say late 1349, it was up to like between 50 and 60 death rate. Not only were they being killed by the plague, but in London, the murder rates doubled. So the plague isn't just what's killing people. People are double timing it on killing each other.
Well, if you think about it too, to kill 50% of the population in London is going to take a lot longer than killing 50% of the population in somewhere that has half the amount of people.
And this is at a time when London is, just like we were saying, cobblestone streets, but people are dumping shit buckets out and everything like that. They're living within close proximity. Sanitation is not it's not on the menu.
Is it considered murder if you're dumping a dead body out of your window and it lands on somebody in the street?
Ooh. It was the body that killed him.
Dead guy did it.
Yeah, exactly. Blame the body, not the person. Scotland's looking at this and is like, oh shit, because who else likes to fight with England? Scotland, exactly. They have a little bit more, a little more skin in the game here. And
there's no water between you. You're on the same chunk of land.
That's what I'm saying. It's the skinniest portion. Neighbor. Yeah, it's the skinniest portion, but still, you're connected by land. So 1350 rolls around and Scotland's like, they are just dying left and right. They think, again, this is God's punishment against the filthy English that, deserve this. And they got 50% less people. Let's just go down there and take over. So they all gather like on that border. They're amassing their troops. And because they're right fucking next to England, where the plague has gotten to, all of a sudden the plague gets into that area and took care of essentially a huge portion of that army, as well as then spread it back into Scotland. So I guess they were like, ooh, so God's pissed at us too. Did not see that coming.
Does that turn you off of that thought that maybe it's God? Because if you believe that God has your best intentions and you're the most righteous group and then it hits you too.
I think you blame the British or you blame the English at that point.
Yeah,
again. It's not God. It's just God. Like those, not only did they get themselves killed, but they spread their disgusting British disease over to us.
They've had their filthy tea-stained hands up in our area, and that's what's getting us too. Just to think about the way that this just leached into everything. I mean, these are just spoils of war. These are actually probably stuff that's coming from France that's still in like wooden English crates that the French had taken from them the last time they kicked their ass.
They didn't even have it's like when you move somewhere, there's still boxes for like years in the garage, and then if you were to move again, it's like, well, some of our stuff is still boxed up.
There's bottles of French wine that have passed borders going one way and the other multiple times that they just hadn't got to before they ended up losing war.
And no one opens it. They want to let it age. Yeah.
But that's just it. It's like you said, it's your belief. It's almost like your hubris to think, well, these people are dying of illness. We're going to walk in there and take advantage. And then all of the shit, there's no way that disease, whatever killed them, could come back to us. Let's just send it everywhere.
They're those English pussies can't get over a sniffle. We'll be fine. We're the Scots.
But it didn't matter. This had no, I mean, there's a certain segment, I want to say it was in a documentary that I was watching, that they believed that Europeans, there was like 0.02% of the population had a natural immunity to this. So
not a large portion.
No, we're talking about just a fragment. And I'm sure those people had no idea that they had this, but at the same time, you got to start feeling like you're lucky.
Oh, yeah.
If you just have this natural immunity and you're out there doing it, you don't know to put your skills to good work and go be a nurse somewhere in one of these places where you can't catch it. You're just every single day, you're waking up and stretching and be like, I feel good. Yeah. This is great. And then you have everybody else on the street.
As you watch your family die around you. Yeah.
Yeah, just because you have a natural immunity doesn't mean that everybody else in your family does. It's just a luck of the draw. That was literally winning the lottery back then.
And then while this is happening as well, because it's still on the mainland in Europe, it starts to kind of spread from France and then starts working its way kind of east again toward like Germany, areas like that. It couldn't essentially move directly from like Greece and Italy up that way because I believe is that where like the Bavarian Alps are, things like that. There's a couple mountain ranges there, like also in Switzerland and that area where it's much harder for things to actually travel across. There's not shipping routes there. So as it works its way kind of into Germany, it's hitting there. Of course, it works its way from England and Scotland into Scandinavia because there's fucking merchant ships traveling to and from there. And at this point, it finally works its way in 1352 all the way to Moscow. So it almost does this weird thing where it makes like, if you were to draw a C, but start at the bottom and then draw it up, it kind of does that. It goes from Constantinople, works its way up, and then wraps around and finally starts heading east again.
We got some sad, spooky things before we get into Russia.
Yeah.
All that happens. Germany, Scotland, Scandinavia, between 1348 and 1350. Just that fast. In 1349, there is got to be one of the scariest things ever. Just for me personally, whenever I see like any videos of these online, ghost ships scare the shit out of me. Because if you just roll up on a ship that's sitting out in the middle of the sea and there's nobody on it, you don't know what the story is.
That's Bermuda Triangle shit.
Yeah.
I love that. Like the ocean liners. Hasn't there been an instance of an ocean liner that didn't have anybody on it?
Or down in the Keys when you just run across an empty speedboat. It's like, oh, well, that makes sense. That guy probably had 30 keys of coke.
Check for cocaine. Yeah. Yeah.
But in 1349 in Bergen in Norway, there is this ghost ship that just rolls up onto land. And as it rolls up onto land, you're waiting for people to get off. It's right outside of Bergen, so you have villagers that are sitting there watching this ship for days. Nobody's left this ship and come off this ship. Got to go investigate. You got to go see what it is.
Free shit.
Yeah.
Free ship.
So as they walk onto this ghost ship, they realize that all of the passengers on this ship are dead. This ship was bound to somewhere else, and as everybody died, the currents just happened to carry it into Bergen.
Not like cool pirate ship Dead, where it's like skeletons and pirate outfits with swords going through them. This is decomposing, rotting bodies with fucking swollen lymph nodes, buboes just covered in buboes and shit.
Same time, though, bunch of cargo on that
free
ship.
Stuff, yeah.
So Bergen comes up huge to where they're kicking the bodies aside and they're just carrying all of this supply into the city.
With a fine layer of rat sitting at the bottom of it.
And that fine layer of rat carries the plague into Norway. And it's just incredible how by chance a ship runs ashore and everybody goes on and it just hits an entire country after that and spreads. As you said, 1352, it would finally make its push into Russia. It ends up sparing Moscow until 1353 because we had General Winter holding it off temporarily until it could finally make its big push into the city. And this is where we get the full circle moment where those trade routes the Mongols had cut off into the Russian Empire because of religion bought them a total of 5 years, really, until this makes it full circle back up in there. Some parts of Europe actually didn't do as bad, though. They were spared due to isolation and just these infrequent trade routes that they would have, and these trade relations that were just kind of not always there. Poland was a place that somehow, there's so many jokes about the Polish people, but they knew how to fight off infection pretty well, I think. They held this isolationist kind of stay out of my country.
I think I've tracked it back. Okay, the whole joke about Polish people is that it takes a lot of Polish people to do a simple task, right?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Maybe that joke came out of the fact that the Polish had so many more people left after the plague that they could afford to have 8 people screwing a light bulb.
Yeah, okay. That actually, yeah, that tracks.
And so the joke is, it used to be, why does it take 8 Polish people to screw in a light bulb? And it's like, because there's enough of them alive to screw in the light bulb.
Because they fought off the Black Plague.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not as good of a joke. It just doesn't hit it quite the same. There was this theory that the Polish people liked cats. They didn't look at cats as the demons that I think everybody else believed they were. I don't know what the Christian belief that cats were bad were, but anyways, they kept them around.
A lot of people migrated from Egypt into Poland, I think, at some point. No, I'm just fucking.
It had to come from, yeah, the Ptolemies ended up in Poland somehow, and they brought their cats with them. These cats were supposed to keep the rats at bay, and it sounds like a good fun theory, except for the fact that the fleas would then enter the cats and the cats would die as well, so it would spread just the exact same because eating the rats doesn't stop the fleas.
I think they had some pretty hardcore quarantine, and this is actually where we get the concept of quarantine during this time of the Black Plague. It comes from the Italian word, I think you said quarantino, or I think part of it was a combination of two, because of course if like people in Venice, you're going to be speaking some type of dialect.
It's just 40 in Italian.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
An area of Italy.
It was initially 14 days, but then after they figured 14 days wasn't enough for the virus or the bacterium to work its way through, they changed it to 40 days.
And that's a big feather in your cap to be able to hold off something that just ravaged everywhere else along your continent.
I think they were pretty hardcore, where if they kind of the same deal with Milan, where if there was an instance, it wasn't kind of like an understanding way of being like, oh, you've got plague. Is there anything we could do? It's like, you've got plague. We're going to board you up and brick you up inside your own house, and this thing ain't getting out.
We're not going to kick you out of the city with a parting gift. We're not going to send you a bunch of stuff. You're not going to live that long.
You get to stay in your home.
Yeah.
You are required to stay in your home. And there's not going to be anything getting into your home.
Home hospice care was just them asking how they're feeling as they're boarding up the house and bricking up the windows.
I was going to say, you just are sitting in your house and you just see, like in the cartoon where you see the bricks start to like lay themselves further and further up the window. That's actually what they did in Milan, which you would think Milan was right in the hot spot of that. Right there by Italy and everything. Milan ends up only having a death rate of 15%. And it's like you were saying, it was literally situations where someone would have plague. Maybe their family didn't have it. And it was just like, everyone in the house, we're blocking you guys. Sorry. It's for the good of the city.
Yeah. Say your goodbyes, get out. We're going to keep an eye on you for a while to make sure that you're okay. But everybody else in your house is just gone. Estimates put the total loss in Europe, and this number varies widely, and I believe it's probably because 25% was an early number, and we've just gone back and revised and understood the mass amount of loss, between 25 and 60% of its population.
I'm going to say closer to 60.
Definitely
50, I think it's 50 to 60.
Because again, just like war, we're not just talking about the loss of the people that are dying from the sickness.
You're not away from the front lines.
Yeah.
The front lines are literally just spreading and advancing.
You have everybody beyond that if you don't have enough people out in the field to pick the harvest that year, and
now
you're not getting fed,
and
it's all going to just affect you in a different way. Some of the smaller cities were decimated up to 90% of their populations. There's literally, I want to say it was in France or England, one of the two, where after World War I and after we got airplanes, they were spotting these old abandoned villages where the forest had just grown back over them to cover them up. Just like in the Amazon, where it took over these ancient civilizations.
Reclaimed it, yeah. Because there weren't enough people to sustain a viable population. Even if 10%, 20% survived in those circumstances, you look around and you say, probably not a good omen.
No.
Still even being in the city, so we're going to leave.
Yeah. North African numbers were more difficult to determine just because record keeping was kind of less available. Some of those cities experienced up to a 50% population loss. But when you start looking at those numbers and you start realizing just what it was and how this hit so badly, you have to wonder why it was so contagious. Like, just how in the world could it get to somebody so much faster in different ways?
Three-prong attack, buddy.
Three-prong attack. You had the bubonic plague, you had the pneumonic plague, and you had the septicemic plague.
All caused by Yersinia pestis. The bubonic had I want to say, 80% of the victims. So people that caught it, not 80% of the population. 80% of the people that caught this would die within 8 days. And this was the one that affected the lymph nodes and would get the like giant swelling pus or like not boils because that's something else, but basically the big swollen lymph nodes and like the lumps and everything.
Well, to go through all of these, nowadays we have antibiotics.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff is curable, but again, we're going to talk about what untreated and treatments are on these things. With the bubonic plague, starts with the infected flea bite, swollen lymph nodes, the buboes like Chris was just talking about. Most likely it's going to end up in your groin or your armpits because that's where your biggest nodes are, I guess. Fingers and toes would start to turn black as your extremities weren't getting the right blood flow. The blood that was getting there was already dead, which would make it black. Mortality rate, 40 to 60%. You have basically 50-50 shot on average of living through this. Nowadays, if you can get it early enough, it's, I believe, below 10%.
Yeah.
So if you get antibiotics quick enough now, you got a great chance of survival, whereas it's a coin flip back then.
Okay, so I want to break it down because we just named a bunch of percentages. So the 80% of the victims, those would die within 8 days. Some would actually be able to recover and everything. So that's where you get a mortality rate that's lower than the ones that died within the first 8 days. That was just how quickly that this version could actually go through its like process.
Oddly enough, this is the lowest mortality rate.
It's the lowest mortality, but I think the most common, right?
Yeah.
So lowest mortality, most common. So then we move on to the mnemonic version of it. This one had a 90 to 95% mortality rate. Is that what you had as well?
Yeah, just nearly 100%.
Yep. And so this one was a respiratory illness. So again, you would actually have fever, cough, shortness of breath. You would start coughing up blood, I believe was one of the things. And this one was transmitted through the air, the miasma theory from, droplets of the infected. We should all be very familiar with a fucking pneumonic, a pneumonic type thing, because this is exactly what COVID was. It was being transmitted, and this was the most dominant form of it. With treatment, and we're going to go through some of these treatments, which are batshit.
Well, these are current day treatments.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes much more sense.
Yeah,
okay.
This is antibiotics.
Yeah, so 90 to 95 untreated, which back then everything was untreated. Treated now, 50%. That's today. Even today, 50%. That was the second most common. And then we get to the least common, which was the septicemic, which thank God that it was the least common, because this thing, untreated, which everything was back then, near 100, almost 100% chance you're going to die from this. And it was fucking fast. So fast, in fact, that they said in some circumstances when people had this type, you would see somebody, you would tuck them in for the night. They would go to sleep fine, and they would not wake up because of this. And when you kind of see different, like if you've ever seen images, most of the time the images of the plague that you see are going to be the bubonic. That's the people getting piled onto carts that have the big swollen areas on their body. Pneumonic, that's going to be something that you're not going to see so much because essentially of how it attacks the body. Septicemic, you would see areas of the body start to darken, the bottoms of the feet, extremities, things like that. And you would just get these like discolorations all over the body. So again, this was one that when you see that kind of stuff, I think some movies kind of show a combination of everything that you see, but it was kind of separate versions of this one type of bacterium that caused it. So that's why also it was so successful, is it has so many different ways that it can affect you.
As soon as that blood is infected, it gets pumped to every single organ, and eventually those organs are going to fail. You're going to go into shock. You can develop this from the pneumonic and the bubonic, so your primary infection can get into your blood. Fleas aren't always going to bite on a vein. It's not going to get into your blood. They're going to bite wherever they can into your tissue.
Multiple times.
Yeah.
So you're also getting different, like one time they might not get it. They bite you a whole bunch of other times in your sleep. Just a higher chance of it.
Your mortality rate, like Chris said, you're almost 100% here. With treatment today, 20 to 25%. So a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to survive this.
Which is crazy that it's lower than the pneumonic nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know if it's easier to clean the blood than it would be
stuff. Yeah, maybe.
Anywhere else. But just the wording on this, and this is what we were talking about earlier of chicken or the egg. Pneumonic plague, did they have pneumonia before this, or is this where we came up with the term pneumonia from mnemonic?
And is pneumonia is the term pneumonic or mnemonic? It's just simply dealing with the respiratory system. So it could be pneumonia is just that strain of something that impacts your respiratory system. Is bronchitis a form of like a pneumonic type bacteria or virus?
Yeah, and you have septicemic. I mean, sepsis is a big issue these days too, where you get an infection inside your blood. I'm sure that these are probably the same thing as going back and renaming the Black Death. As soon as we had a way to describe pneumonia, we call it mnemonic. As soon as we have a way to describe sepsis, we have septic. Septicemic.
Before we throw into the treatments and everything, did you have the theories on the causes at the time?
You're talking about like religious and all that stuff?
Yeah. So essentially, divine retribution was the number one thought that, of course, if something was sweeping through, it was because of everyone's sins and all that shit. My favorite one actually was the planetary conjunction theory. So
the astrology shit.
Yep. So an alignment and a conjunction are different. Alignment is essentially where you see planets and they're all formed in a line. So technically, if we're looking at it from Earth, planets might be hiding behind each other, so you really can't see them. A conjunction is when planets are close enough to each other that you can actually see them in the sky, but they appear close. So there was a conjunction that had occurred, I guess, some years before, and it was between Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, which is bonkers that they could identify that even at that time. Yeah. But because of this conjunction essentially caused, much like the moon and the tides, vapors to be drawn from the Earth. These vapors mixed with the air and spread, which corrupted the spirit in the body. This is the miasma theory that you were talking about, where these vapors can create this bad air, and the bad air was essentially the cause of this. And this was kind of the only two prevailing theories at the time. It was either like God's pissed off or the planets are just too close together.
It makes me mad just hearing it, like just thinking about that whole idea. At the same time, I got to pull out all of the hundreds of years of understanding that we have now.
Yeah. It's hard to look at it like at the time.
These people know two things. They know a little bit about the planetary stuff and they know about religion. So if there is a finger to point at, it's going to be one of those two and then a third because of another religion. But at the same time, you just can't help but go back to it because it's all you've been taught. Science in this time frame is still covering religion.
Yeah. It was they came up with the planetary one because they got sick of people that like were really pious being like, why is God pissed at me? Why do I have the plague? And they're like, actually, I don't think it's because of God. I think you're fine in regards to that. I think it's more because, look up in the sky. You see those really bright stars that are all kind of close together. I mean, that's got to be fucking with us, right?
That's what it was. All of the peasants and everybody inside the parish were the sinners that were causing the issue. And then everybody inside of the religion and all the priests and everything were like, but we're all sin free, so it can't be us. How do we explain it? We know about planets. We can start talking about that. That was their excuse.
What was the thing you said that they did? Okay, you brought up the point of like, priests are working overtime at this point because you have to be given your last rites?
Yep.
Okay. So you have to be given the last rites. Is that your last opportunity to essentially atone for everything you did in order to get yourself into heaven? It's like, okay.
That's the clean all. That's the last confession that you give. The priest gives you the last rites. If you receive your last rites, you aren't held in limbo. You get into heaven.
You get your absolutionist thing. Okay.
Yep.
So you're going to be running short because they're also susceptible to this and they're also dying as well.
And you're visiting everybody that's on death's door that's still very...
Yeah, exactly.
they can still spread this.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what happened. Your priest started, it's like watching your Amazon delivery, your mail delivery on the tracking system. It's like your priest is here, should be arriving at this time. And then all of a sudden you get an alert. It's like your priest actually died at his fourth stop. So we're going to have to push you back a little bit before we can get a replacement. You had people that were on their deathbeds that weren't able to get these last rites. And so finally the Pope came out and just did like a blanket
absolution. Yep.
Yeah, a blanket absolution is just like, okay, just so everyone's aware, I'm just doing kind of a what if or a just in case. Everyone is absolved for all their shit.
The best part about it too is what they said was you still had to make your last confession, but if the priest couldn't get to you, then you would just have to confess to the next closest man. And if there wasn't a man, if the priest couldn't get to you and you couldn't confess to another man, a woman would be a suitable person to confess to.
You just have like, two plague victim dudes sit next to each other and it's like, and then I did this. And he's like, that's fucked up. And he's like, what did you do? And he's like, I did this. And he's like, nice. They're just going back and forth to each other.
But how bad is it even at that point in time that it's like, and if you can't get another man, I guess a woman will work.
At least they gave that.
Yeah.
I know it's bad, in hindsight and everything, but it's like, what if it was, you literally had like your wife and your daughter sitting there and it's like, you need to tell me there's these two people that could hear me, but I'm not able to use them.
Yeah, they can't be my sounding board. But just to think about from the perspective of a person, and we'll talk about this number 23 here in a second because this shit's fucking incredible. I know I keep bringing it up, but it just blows my mind every time I run through the numbers. If you have your wife or whoever's living with you go and talk to the clergy and they're like, he needs his last rites, he's on the deathbed. And you get there and they're like, okay, we'll sign the sheet. And you look at the sheet and there's 500 other people in front of you. Good chance is those 500 people aren't going to make it, so they're going to die before the priest gets to them. But if you come home to your husband, you're like, you're number 200 on the list, man. If you want to get into heaven to get these last rites, you're going to have to hold on until the priest can get here. You're going to have to outlive these other 199 people
As
to
he just
get last
coughs up
rites.
a big old wad of blood, and he's like, okay.
And that's just in case you don't get bumped by somebody that's higher in the pecking order than you are. Like, it's just a hope and a prayer that a priest gets there to the point where the Pope has to be like, all right, I know everybody's worried about this. You're probably all going to die. Absolution if you die. If you live, you don't get absolved.
If I don't do this, it may come a time when I'm being forced in my popely duties when we lose enough of these guys to go out and start doing this stuff myself, and that ain't happening. So everyone gets a pass. There was also an instance in Rome when it was hitting Rome really hard. They just couldn't get rid of all the bodies. And so the Pope consecrated, I can't remember what term it was,
probably
the river in Rome, and they just started dumping bodies in the river. And so it was just like it would be, read at a funeral and everything, dumping the bodies and just being able to chuck those in the river was considered like what they would classify as like a holy burial or a qualifying holy burial.
And I don't remember if this was pre-episode or during the episode. Not a lot of wells. Not a real groundwater type society. If your water is going to be coming, it's probably going to be coming from a river. And everybody in Rome just dumped their dead, decaying bodies in the river, and everybody downriver is probably using that water to supply themselves.
The other thing, too, is, when they're trying to dispose of these bodies in various places, at a certain point, you're burying so many bodies that whether you're using the lasagna method or anything, you still have layers that are close to the surface. Or you're burying so many that you're just digging shallow graves. When these areas would flood, and same type of deal, like I think in New Orleans, because it's down below, you would get all of these bodies coming back up and just washing into like areas in the city. Bodies that had been buried like 2 years ago would be just all of a sudden floating by. And so guess what? If you didn't catch the plague at that point, there's a score of other diseases caused by essentially this type of bacteria or separate types of bacteria that would thrive in this environment. So you're just constantly dealing with the shit that they did years prior.
You can't get away from it. We'll see the reoccurrences of these because we'll talk about later on. It's just every single year somewhere is getting hit.
All right. Well, if someone got plague, how do you treat this stuff back then?
Before we jump into the four humors, I'm not going to hold back on this 23 days. So the theory of the 23 days, it takes 10 to 14 days, we'll call it 14 days on the long end, for plague bacteria to kill a rat colony. It would then take an average of 3 days for fleas to find a new host, so to find a human being. Yersinia Pestis invades the human host, 3-day incubation period. On average, you have 3 days. 80% fatal cases. It took 23 days from the initial rat colony to die to get to the point of a human dying. That was how fast it would take, literally from like snout to tail, from beginning to end. That was just how quick it was. These rats could land, and in 23 days, you're dying from something that just showed up in your land.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how fast this thing moves.
That's the biggest thing is we've talked about war in this, and the reason you're able to process the amount of bodies in war is you're just like, they're fighting in this location. They're using these weapons that are able to kill tons of people at a time. They're fighting over these insane amounts of time just constantly and everything. But this thing is invisible and it's indiscriminate. And all of a sudden it just rolls into town, and 23 days later, all of a sudden, a fucking quarter of your population could be out.
And to bring it back to that same war metaphor, you had a certain period of time when you landed boots on the ground where they expected you had a life expectancy as soon as those boots hit the ground.
Yeah.
And in some places, the war was so bad that it would be 48 hours. You had a general life expectancy once Yersinia Pestis hit your ground there of 23 days. Like, it's just that fast that this can hit.
The original 23andMe.
Yep. As far as treatments go, there was this old idea of the 4 humors. The 4 humors, to me, feels like just something that's real funny. It was a belief that your body only had 4 different fluids in it. It was black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. I don't know if phlegm makes that cut. I guess it's just because it's unexplainable when you get sick that your nose starts running, so phlegm just has to live inside you.
Yeah, and you can consider urine, I guess.
Yeah, how was piss not in there? Is that just yellow bile? Oh, maybe.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Well, yellow bile is the stuff that you throw up when you don't have shit on your stomach.
True. So yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe pee was something in there. But if there was an imbalance in your body between these 4 humors, illness would just hit. It took an average of 3 days from the first signs of infections till death, like we were just talking about in the 23 days. So you got to make sure to keep these 4 humors, these 4 liquids in balance. And there's a number of ways that they did it. One kind of protection method is actually not as dumb as what we're going to get into. They believed in bathing in vinegar to try to protect sickness. So if you were going to go tend to bodies or anything like that, you would bathe yourself in vinegar before and after. Vinegar is
like a pre-tox.
Yeah. Vinegar is a purification method. It does kill bacteria. That's why you have vinegar that can last.
So I have a goddamn spray bottle with half vinegar, half water in my house for cleaning stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in theory, if you did get some of the bacteria on you and you go bathe in vinegar, it would be effective.
Which is so weird because the juxtaposition to actual bathing during this time was completely different, and it had to be just because of water. They were saying, okay, you guys know when you bathe, it opens up your pores, but that's only if it's hot water, right?
Yeah.
Warm water. You're opening up your pores, which makes you more susceptible to your pores absorbing this bacteria. So no one fucking bathe.
Yeah, I just don't know how they would have known about pores back then.
I mean, if you put warm water on your face and look really closely, but shit, they didn't have mirrors in the fact. God damn it. No, we can't rabbit hole down this. No,
It's one guy staring at another guy.
We're
being
an hour and 26 minutes in, man. We can't go down the mirror hole.
Of course, you would have to figure out a way because you need to get this bad air out and you need to keep it away from you. If you put herbs and spices in the vinegar, that good, clean smell will try to get rid of the bad air.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Push it away from you.
Gets all up in that body.
Yeah. Another way that they would do it, they would use onions. This is some real old world shit as a home remedy.
This is something you hear from your great grandma.
Yeah.
When you walk over and you have a rash and she's like, rub onion on it.
You would chop up the onions and you would rub them on the buboes I don't know what the rubbing them on would be. They believe that the fumes would be able to combat the miasma, the bad air. So I guess opening up your pores is a bad thing, but opening up your tear ducts and crying, does that push maybe some of the bile out too?
I think it's a thing where all of a sudden you now smell like onion. So now you're thinking about your senses being covered in all this onion. And so it's taking the attention off the buboes.
Yeah, true. And this whole miasma theory was actually just fully prevalent to the point where Pope Clement VI would tell people, in order to stop getting the plague and to stop the spread of the plague, that you're only to shake hands if the breath is sweet. Now, if you're close enough to somebody to realize that the breath is sweet,
before you shake it, you got to reach from, you're like, lean in, breathe right in my face. Okay, I'll shake your hand.
Well, and if it's bad, then you're like, no, I'm not going to shake your hand to get sick, because if we shake hands, that's how
you
I
didn't
get
just breathe that shit right in my face to where I could smell it.
And I'm inhaling it to see if it stinks or not.
But this hand it'll soak right into this hand.
My favorite method, and I'm sure you have a favorite method, the Vicari method was named after the proprietor of this idea. The idea was that you would take a chicken, you would pluck all of the feathers off of the chicken's ass, so it would be a bare-ass chicken.
Anyone who knows anything about chickens knows those are the best feathers, right?
Well, there's a reason why. You can't have the feathers breaking the seal, because then you would tie the chicken's bare ass onto your buboes, and the general belief at the time was that chickens breathe through their assholes. So as the chicken would be breathing through its ass and you attach that to the buboes, the chicken would then be sucking the infection out of the buboes via his ass, and then it comes out of his beak.
Is this a multiple verification situation?
I hit a couple.
Okay.
There was another method where they would actually stick the chicken feathers into the buboes to, I don't know what, but
here's the thing. We're going to talk about something here about 2 bullet points down. I don't know why I'm so just completely shaken by this chicken ass suction theory, because that actually, from a health perspective, is more sanitary than some of the other stuff that we're going to do here.
Yeah. You come into a house, somebody's infected there. He's just got like 4 just bare ass chickens tied to his body. It's like,
just cages.
How's it going? Yeah. Does it seem to be working?
Speaking of that, we should probably talk a little bit about the plague doctors.
Yeah.
So the plague doctors are exactly what you can probably envision a medieval doctor, talking about the dude with the giant, like, crazy ass raven beak.
That was later on. That wasn't during the Black Death.
Oh, it says that that's what they did have, because that's what they stuffed. They stuffed those things with the herbs and flowers and stuff to where they were breathing in the sweet air. That's what the whole point of the beak was to stuff. And then they wore like these big leather gloves, like leather big coats and everything to do this.
My research said 16th century. Look it up to see.
Okay.
I think it might have been a little later on. Just to get back to this Vicari method, the idea was to suck all of the poison out of the bulbos by using a chicken's ass. Not uncommon, because the other sucking method that they're going to use is leeches. Leeches are a tale as old as time when it comes to trying to help people. I think in other countries, what century?
Oh.
In other countries, I think leeches are like still used today.
You're right. That was the 17th century one.
17th century. Okay. So that does come later on. We'll talk about that with the 17th century. But
you guys are doing it maskless.
Yeah. I don't know why leeches. I guess it sort of makes sense if you go by this 4 fluids theory, that sucking the blood out is a good thing. To me, and we'll talk about it with the bloodletting, any sort of opening in your body is just another vehicle for infection to get there.
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess it's actually both, if you look at that. So maybe it was just something, the prevailing theory was that worked. That type of mask was what they were using at the time. If it ain't broke, don't fix it type of situation.
Yeah, and it was broken, and they didn't realize that. But
I wonder, part of me is just kind of like putting myself, okay, it's black leather. They're wearing this mask. It looks like a fucking raven or like some type of bird. It's terrifying, like especially to anybody. But for that to be the last thing that you might see when they're trying to do this shit in these treatments, there was a whole segment of art that was created out of this time period called the Dance Macabre. And it was basically where you see a lot of art with like skeletons and like kind of demons and things like that, representing what the plague came in and what it was doing, the pestilence, things like that. Not to be confused with the song Dance Macabre by the Swedish rock band Ghost, which actually is a pretty good song. But yeah, so the Dance Macabre was this whole like movement of art that was kind of based upon all of the death that was going on in Europe at the time.
Well, we'll talk about an unintended consequence later that I think is, again, sort of cool, where we have these unintended consequences of this terrible thing that happened. A lot of people died, just a really, really bad thing. But there are some flowers that grow out of the shit that was the Black Death.
Yes. Okay, so back to the treatments.
Yeah, and perfectly enough, our next talk is about shit.
I had to search this through so many various different avenues to make sure that this was correct.
It just doesn't make any sense. There's no like logical maybe you found something that I didn't?
Nope, there's not.
Okay.
This is very straightforward, and so it's going to be very business the way we discuss this. They would take herbs, which were essentially the version of medicine, pharmaceuticals of the day, and they would mix in human shit.
As a binding agent?
I don't care. No.
Yeah, no.
Use fucking mud.
True. Okay.
So they mix in human shit. They would lance the boils, which is basically where like you take something sharp and you cut the boil open, correct, down like the center or whatnot, and then would stuff the herbs and shit mixture into the fucking wound. I just wrote, what the fuck? Like, I don't think, I think we will sit here and not be able to even fathom, regardless of how long we think about this. It's just so, is this a desperation thing where nothing has worked and it's just like, have you guys tried shit yet? Have you tried shit? And they're like, no, we haven't. They're like, try it, see if we can check it off the list. Nothing else is working. Oh, by the way, in addition to the shit, let's go ahead and did you hear about the drinking piss?
No, I mean that weird people I think still do that today. So maybe this is where it started.
Well, hold on. This had to be non-plague piss.
Yeah, of course.
You can't get
you're
that.
Not putting
you can't get that dirty plague piss, I guess. But
I'm assuming the shit was probably non-plague.
But this was something where like fucking people of means and nobility were like, get us some of that sweet non-plague piss so we can drink that and not catch this thing and help, purify the body and prevent from getting it. Like, what are we doing? This had to have come at a point during the plague where it was just anything and nothing is off the table.
We're just throwing darts.
Yeah.
And not to mention, if you're rich and you're doing this, you have the means to experiment. As far as the class system goes, everybody was hit by this. But of course, if you're a person of means that can go escape to your summer house, you're going to have a much better chance of survival. Mm-hmm. But also at the same time, if you are living longer and you're still seeing this plague prevalent and still around, you're going to have time to experiment and try to find some new things to try to protect you, right? Like, you have to live long enough to figure out to try to drink pee in order to drink pee.
I cannot think of a counterpoint to that, actually. They did get it right to a degree in one belief. Pope Clement would actually, when he would go talk to people or kind of do his Pope shit, he would actually sit with fires on either side of him. And that was basically believed to have protected him from getting the illness because essentially, and I don't know if this was the prevailing theory of what it actually did, because I don't know if they knew that it was keep coming through rats and everything like that. But the heat essentially would repel the rodents. And then the smoke would essentially keep, like, even if they got close, fleas are going to try to avoid the smoke.
Yeah.
And so if someone standing next to him or close to him had fleas on their clothing or anything like that, once the smoke started hitting, that thing's going to try to probably leave a little bit. So it did, was pretty effective. But how many people are going out and being like, yeah, we're just going to walk around and always have two fires on us?
Well, not to mention, you still have people ministering to him. You still have servants that are coming in. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's still a chance to carry it in. But at the same time, you can't call it stupid because he survived. He never got the plague. So it had to have been effective enough to keep him alive.
And what was the most prevalent one that they probably did?
This is like I was talking about with the leeches. Anytime that you open a part of your body, you're just opening it up to more bacteria. We know this now because of germ theory. But bloodletting, where you had to express the excess humors that are inside your body to put yourself in balance. These liquids always have to be in balance.
So my question on this is, okay, the 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile.
It sounds so much like a Charlie Kelly thing. Like Charlie Kelly believes in the 4 humors. He believes in the 4 fluids for sure.
Oh, 100%.
Just like when he's trying to root on the Eagles to win the Super Bowl, and he's got to drink brown, he's got to drink yellow, and he keeps running into the traps. He had to get his 4 fluids in.
He's a man with very concrete beliefs.
Yeah.
So the crazy thing about this is the bloodletting thing, I understand it from the standpoint of the 4 humors of being like, we got to keep this stuff. Blood is the most prevalent in the body. So we got to drain enough of this to where it's on par with the yellow bile and the black. First of all, at one point are you like, okay, we think you have too much yellow bile, so we're just going to have you vomit up all this stuff. Where did the fucking black bile come in? What was it generated by?
Black bile had to have been the dead blood that they would lance out of the buboes. Because once that blood dies and it collects, and maybe the infection is that black bile.
Okay.
But at the same time, if
then it's not in balance.
Yeah.
But if it's in the boils and you're getting rid of it,
in there somewhere.
We're trying to make sense of the senseless at this point. Is what
there's
we're
no
trying to do.
dipstick that you can put inside a human being and be like, oh, well, you're low on yellow.
Another thing that comes into play before we talk about the bloodletting is this is still at a time when people are fucking opportunistic as fuck.
Yeah.
They would have extortion rackets where the people that were coming around collecting the dead bodies and everything would basically go into somebody's house and be like, hey, you're going to go ahead and give us some additional shit. And they're going to be like, no, they're like, you realize we can just kill you and throw you on the cart and blame it on the plague. No one's going to question us.
None the wiser.
Yep. And so you had people doing that kind of shit. I didn't read anything about it directly, but I could definitely see it being something that happened. All these priests having to come around to give people their last rites and everything.
I think you're there with this.
There's probably some type of financial incentive to have that done, being like, hey, I can try to get to your house a little bit faster. How many people were just throwing on the fucking clergy cloth or trying to design it themselves and being like, oh, I have a Bible. I'm walking in. That'll be 2 shillings, please, to do it. And are just doing these fucking bogus, and they're bogus in regardless, but these fucking fake last rites to everybody.
And at the same time, if you are leaving after you collect your 2 shillings or whatever you owe, and what about a donation for the church? He was impious. That's why he died of this. If you want to try to keep yourself alive, maybe give a little bit more to the church.
No
give
kidding.
us a
Hey,
donation.
I see that you're not sick yet. Maybe we should, you can send a little bit to the man upstairs and help keep that from happening.
We're running a 2-for-1 special. The one costs more, but I'll give you a blessing. I'll give him his last rites. I'll get on that.
It's a Monopoly type thing. Like instead of being houses and hotels, it's like, well, I can actually give him his last rites, 2 shillings. I can bless the whole house. And if you do them both, I'll do it for 4 shillings. It's normally 2 and 3 if you do them separately.
You're getting out of there making money. And yeah, I'm sure at the same time, just in this whole bloodletting idea, there were plenty of people that were walking around posing as doctors because the doctors of the time weren't doctors. They were just people that knew a little bit more about this than anybody else.
Do you think there was situations when people were walking around, guy's got his trench coat on, you hear clanking inside it, he goes, knocks on the door, and someone answers, he's like, I got piss. Opens his trench coat, and it's just, he's like, I got your non-plague, I got the good stuff right here. How about it?
Yeah, well, and it's
like the fucking milkman.
It's a renewable resource.
Yeah. If you could leave your bottles outside after using it, I'll give you a deposit back.
It's like a dare, like a milkman.
Yeah,
You're just bringing fresh piss every single day. The thought process, and this, unfortunately back to the shit, maybe that was a remedy that came from some of these just dumb fake doctors walking around like just making stuff up.
That's true.
There's so many ways that this stuff could have happened, but bloodletting was something that had been happening for centuries before this. This was just a common way to try to get people to feel better. Instead of using the leeches like they did on the actual buboes to suck out the black bile that's inside you, they go straight for the vein. Usually the vein that was closest to the bubble that was bad. So if it was in your armpit, it would be your wrist or your neck. If it's in your leg, it's going to be the interior of your thigh. If you don't really understand where you're cutting and you're hitting a vein and you hit an arterial vein or you hit the femoral.
You're making me tighten up.
Yeah, no, it's not good. I don't like saying it, but instead of dying from the plague, you could just essentially bleed out.
I think it was. I think it was probably one of those situations when that was just like, oh, this one's going a little bit faster.
Too much.
Yeah. You know what? I think this will probably work. If you just want to pay me now, I can get on my way and everything, and then I'll come back and check later.
Everybody got their payments in full first. Yeah. This was a pay before you get serviced. You could also go back to the religious route, because if religion is the reason that this is happening and these sins are because you did something wrong, you could join the group of the flagellation.
The flagellants.
Yep, the flagellants. We're not saying flatulence. This is a word that Chris and I got plenty of laughs about during this research, because when you're talking about flagellation and it sounds like flatulation, and you're talking about these guys out there flatulating in public, you're talking about women not being allowed to join the flatulence, so they weren't allowed to essentially fart.
Keep that shit in your own house, lady.
They had to flagellate in their own homes.
So the term flagellation is essentially the act of actually punishing oneself, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Always think back to the Tom Hanks Da Vinci Code, the guy that whips himself.
He was a flagellant.
Yeah.
It had to have been. So these groups of men would just walk the streets in these white robes that had open backs on it. So I was thinking like a hospital gown, basically, just a white hospital gown that they didn't tie up in the back.
I heard that they either did that or they just wore pants, just something from the waist up. And then maybe they had like some type of scarf that just went over the neck to cover the front a little bit to keep the back exposed.
Like a classy Porky Pig style.
Kind of like an infinity scarf, maybe.
Yeah. Like a Borat type swimsuit.
Yes. Yeah. Except pants.
Yeah. So assless chaps. Maybe that was an early inventor in assless chaps.
That's where you had the longer strings on the whip. So you could get down backwards down to the,
And that's what it was. This wasn't a cat of nine tails, but it was still a three-tailed whip that was knotted with nails at the end. And basically they were using this to try to purge their bodies of the sins that had brought on the plague. They would walk around and just whip themselves in the back and in the ass through the streets. Of course, if you're a religious person, if you're a pope, if you're a priest, anything like that, and you see this happening, and then the next day you look out and you see 4 more people that are out there, and this starts to become a prevailing type of almost religion to try to clear yourself of it, you're eventually going to have to condemn this, because they're getting the ears of the people more than you are by trying to say it'll be okay.
Well, and this was also a situation where the flatulence, or God damn it. The flagellation was kind of a movement that also involved pilgrimages. So you would have these like large groups of these men that were going from town to town and were walking through the streets and whipping themselves on the backs and everything to absolve themselves of all of this kind of stuff. But at the same time, you are traveling through plague area from town to town. You are also spreading the plague in this manner as well. So just the simple fact that there was no type of connection between like, well, it travels, we're traveling. Nah, there's not a connection on that. And we're also making sure we're keeping these nice fresh wounds opened up on our bodies, consistently traveling through these areas. So, why not?
All this bad air around and we just got these fresh open wounds. If you're not going to flagellate yourself, if you're not going to let out a little blood, if you're not privy to fire, if you don't enjoy the smell of covering yourself in shit, leeches scare you, the chicken ass isn't quite as available as you want.
You're a vegan.
If you're a vegan, you're not going to use the chicken theory. If you've run out of onions, your vinegar supply is low. It may not cure what you got going on. It's a tried and true method, as old as the day is long. If you start blaming the Jews, maybe things will get better. I don't know how this is always the most common denominator in some of these bad episodes, but between 1348 and 1351, these acts of violence towards Jewish communities in France and Toulon, in Spain, Barcelona had plenty. Not shockingly enough, in Germany, this was very prevalent in places like Erfurt, Frankfurt, and Strasbourg. Switzerland, you also had Basel that participated in just basically this full-throated blaming of the Jewish populations. They would accuse them, they would take them in, they would torture them into confessions that they were poisoning the water supply with bubonic plague. But again, if you're torturing a confession, eventually admitting to what you did can't be worse than being tortured day in and day out. So if you just tell them what they want to hear and you lie to them, eventually you might be either let off the hook or killed. You're put out of your misery.
It's just so consistent that we talk about this during, like, there's not a period of time where we've like stepped out and been like, again with the blaming here. And part of it also, here's the thing. So there were people that had provided like sanctuary to these like Jewish populations and everything. I think Poland was actually one of them.
Could be.
Yep. And so one of these, the prevailing theories is that for people that kind of saw reason and common sense, like in Poland, they were like, it's killing them too. Like, you guys do realize that it's also killing them. And if they were trying to use that as a weapon, they wouldn't be killing themselves with it. And then I think you also pointed out something that due to essentially the culture and everything, where you had this entire subset or this entire portion of the European culture being like, don't fucking bathe, don't worry about hygiene, anything like that. I think the Jewish population was kind of a little bit more on the uptick with that.
Jewish practice is very clean. That's why you have to have kosher foods. That's why before you do any sort of cooking or anything like that, you have to bathe yourself and make sure that you are clean. Before you end up laying with a partner, you have to be able to make sure that you're clean and pure. And all of these methods may sound very extreme for a religion now, but if you're trying to stop a bacteria from spreading and just ravaging your population, if you try to stay as clean as possible, it's not going to affect you nearly as much.
Well, your already established ways of doing things are in their own way a sense of quarantine, treatment, prevention.
Jewish quarters in town are already some of the cleanest in the area. In Toulon, April 1348, the Jewish quarter there is sacked. There were 40 Jews that were just killed in their homes. These pogroms just continued across Europe, and it was just basically a situation where in town, if a Jewish population wasn't hit as hard as everybody else, they had to have been the ones that did this. This was a direct attack on Christians. That somehow the Jews felt like now was the time to do this, even though they've been living amongst them for so long.
Yeah.
Now
let's also kill some of our people too.
Yeah. But again, if they're taking care of themselves and they're better off, the Christians are looking at, well, who is dying of this less? Oh, it's an entire population that we already aren't real big fans of and have been
What do you
trying
mean
to get
it
rid
has
of.
something to do with them not rubbing shit in their wounds and drinking piss?
Yeah,
Not a chance.
Purity. No, not purity. February 14th, 1349. This is the first St. Valentine's Day massacre. So Capone is second in this regard. Around 2,000 Jews were burned alive in Strasbourg. Shockingly, this was before the plague even reached the city. So this is a preemptive measure to try to stop the Jews that were in Strasbourg from spreading it inside the city, which I'm sure once it actually did show up in the city and everybody started getting sick and dying, there probably weren't a lot of people that were printing retractions for killing the Jews in the newspaper saying, hey, maybe we got this wrong. It had to have been another sect that was outside another Jewish population that wanted to punish us for killing them.
And
like, it's a victim mentality.
And then spun around where regardless of how much Strasbourg died because of the plague itself, they would be like, the numbers would have been much higher.
Could have been worse.
Yeah.
By 1351, there were 350 documented, because of course you're not always going to document these instances, of incidents of anti-Jewish pogroms that are going on. There were 60 large communities and there were 150 small communities that had been completely exterminated in Europe.
And Adam's use of the word pogrom is not him just not saying program correctly. A pogrom was, and I think we talked about it probably during... Not at Stalin. Was it Stalin?
Could have been. It could have been a couple.
Because there were ones where they had migrated into. That's why there was like larger portions that had migrated to like England and stuff like that, right? Okay.
Yeah, and then in Poland.
Yeah,
because it was.
But the pogroms were essentially these systemic like persecutions and exterminations of these certain communities.
Yeah. Between 1346 and 1671, this is where the numbers of this. The plague dies out. The massive amount of plague that's happening dies out. 1353. We've talked about that. And the reasons for that are just, I don't know if we got down to the reasons, but if you think about it, by 1353, with all the death and destruction, the estimated 200 million people having the population of the world basically at that point, it just kind of ran its course.
It already ran through who it was going to run through. You do get instances where it does like mutate and turn into something different. Cairo is a perfect example of that because they had this type in one way, shape, or form reoccur for 50 times within the next 150 years.
Yeah. And just getting into that, that's the perfect way to get into this. 1346 to 1671, the plague is present somewhere in Europe for every single one of those years.
Do you also kind of wonder what also prevented it is the less people you have, the less people traveling. If you have, like you're saying, these small villages and towns that just got wiped out that didn't have a bunch of like huge stone structures that could have been reclaimed very easily by the forests and the lands that they were around. If you're traveling and you don't have, you're going from big city A to big city B on a trade route. If you don't have 3 of those 5 villages that were between you where you could stop and replenish and do all that kind of stuff, you're not going to make that trade. You're not going to go along that trade route. So I think it also has the factor of less people doing things, less people traveling for fear of getting the plague, and just a simple kind of isolationist of probably a lot of these countries and communities about not wanting to accept outsiders for a while because the last time that a bunch of people came into town, half their population died 23 days later.
Can't take that risk when you're only at 50% now. Yeah. It's just going to keep getting less and less. You have more people staying at home. We'll talk about that as kind of an unintended good consequence. 1628 to 1631, France may have lost another 1 million people to the plague. Just France in and of itself, another 1 million people. So again, this is like a World War I amount of French soldiers that are just dying in this time period.
And again, this is 1628.
Yeah.
We're now jumping forward 250 years.
It's still prevailing all the time. First half of the 17th century, a plague killed 1.7 million people in Italy. So again, you have 50-ish years that 1.7 million people are dying. That's a ton of people still. And this is so far removed. 17th century Spain saw another just extreme incidence of breakout again to the plague, losing more than 1.25 million people on the Iberian Peninsula.
So it took during the Black Plague, the one that we're making reference to, the one that took place over that 7 years, what they kind of condensed that down to. From the result of that, it took 200 years for population levels in Europe to actually recover. Not to keep climbing, but to get back up to pre-plague numbers. 200 years. All of a sudden, you have all those people coming back in. This 17th century plague that you're talking about, you now have it getting back up in 200 years. We're sitting at 1572, 1568, something like that. All of a sudden, less than 100 years later, the population is back doing its thing again, but the plague, there isn't the tools necessary to combat this on a pharmaceutical, biological level. Yeah. The conditions have just gotten better for it to spread again.
The population got back to being big enough to where it can start taking out a large number of people.
Yep.
It's just like we were refilling the tank.
The trade and the travel has resumed. New places have been opened up. Yeah.
Yeah, it just keeps coming back and biting them in the ass. And this is, we talked about it during the 14th century, plague masks were used. This is really when things get locked in. Like this is what a disciple of the apocalypse would be dressed like. In the bird mask, they would shove the different kind of flowers and stuff in front of this beak to try to stop the miasma. I'm sure walking around in it was a pain. You'd always be bumping that beak against something.
You're in a leather trench coat.
Yeah, it's got to be hot.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in Seville in Spain and it's super hot outside, you're walking around in all leather to try to prevent this. But it also shows, too, that it has to be very hot in places to stop the spread of this. So it just continues on and on. But at the same time, the plague, the Black Death, the 14th century changed the world in ways that weren't all bad, because it almost gave a leveling ground to kind of humanity in certain instances.
So what war does for the advancement of technology required by war,
Yeah.
weapons, things like that, when you have an instance of a type of biological warfare against humans in this instance, you're going to get this huge jump in advancements, protocols, things like that, that are going to, jump things. I don't want to say the medical field or anything like that, but essentially as a sanitary quality of life perspective, whereas war would advance that kind of stuff from a technology perspective. This is just changing the way people go about shit day to day.
Well, there's also something that I've heard, could be bullshit, but a main reason why the public transit systems in Europe are so much more efficient than the United States is because they had to rebuild their country so much more recently that they were able to look at it and be like, okay, we can build more trains here, we can build underground subways and everything like that. We can make this efficient because our map was so blown out that we could then rebuild correctly.
Yeah.
Whereas in the United States, we haven't had any mass destruction. It's also a much bigger place, so it's going to be harder to build it. But any city that has a chance, like a second chance at rebuilding your city correctly, you're going to look at public transit differently.
Oh, it's the same thing. You tear down a building, you don't build a building that is using the same building materials and the technology at the time that that building was built.
Yeah.
You build it shinier and newer. Yeah.
And in this same way, different things start to spring up. This probably ushered in the Renaissance into Italy. There were other factors. I mean, there was an influx of the Greeks as the Byzantine Empire fell. So you're going to see them coming into Italy. But at the same time, after you see all of this death and destruction and devastation that went on in front of you, you start to realize that maybe living for an afterlife and your spirituality, this is Tim McGraw. I went skydiving, I went French Alps climbing, I went 2.7 seconds.
On a bull named Fu Manchu.
Yeah, this is a way to where these people started saying, instead of living my life to try to have a good afterlife, I can start creating, I can start building, I can start painting. I can start enjoying things in life that are going to bring more of a cultural significance than just showing up and going to church and trying to make sure that I'm good in the afterlife. I can do it now.
Yeah.
Why am I living for death when I can still go out there and experience what I want to? So a Renaissance period in Europe has always been like a defining moment. And if the Black Death even contributed a little bit to this Italian Renaissance, this is how we get our boy Da Vinci. It's how this all works in a pushing away from religion and into more of a humanistic view.
Yeah.
It also tore through the feudalistic system model or the society models that were in Europe, especially in England, because if you have 50% of your population dying, there's going to be a lot of land that opens up.
You have been so reliant on the serf class.
Yeah.
And those people working that all of a sudden, the advantage used to be this. There was always someone there to take another person's job if they wanted a little bit more. If they wanted to be paid a little bit more, fuck you. There's a person that's waiting to have this job right now. You don't have that anymore. Your bargaining power, your leverage is gone because it didn't devastate the land. You got those fields that have to be tended. That's how you make your money in your little kingdom or your area. But all of a sudden, your workforce has been slashed in half, and those people are sitting there being like, you don't have anyone else to do this.
I got options. If you don't want to pay me more, the guy down the street's definitely going to pay me more because all of his people died too.
Yeah, so now you're getting into a situation where it's this weird type of escalation of like a bidding war, being like, I'm having to pay my people this much. And the next guy over there is like, can I undercut him? No, I can't undercut him because they're not going to take less money. If I want more people, I got to try to, pay my people more than him. And so you get this, I don't want to say it's a creation of, but where you had primarily, and we talked about this maybe during the Crusades one, it was the ruling class, and that could consider yourself governors or people of wealth. And then underneath there was maybe just a sliver of a middle class.
Yeah.
People doing, bakers, cobblers, that kind of stuff.
Mercantilism stuff.
Yes. And then the 85% underneath that was all serfs. Now all of a sudden you get these people that are able to increase their quality of life. It's almost like the creation of the middle class.
A little bit, for sure. It's raising kind of the floor of the caste system, the societal system.
And because less people were there, but now you're able to also create, maybe not as much, but you're able to create a sufficient amount of food that's not having to be spread throughout such a large population.
Yes.
Everybody is getting more food. The diet's improved, which means the hardiness of people improved, which means if people aren't having to, we talk about this all the time with how a society actually advances, is you have to be to a point where the requirements to live are already locked up for you. Once you start having enough food and all of a sudden it's not contingent on every single harvest to go ahead and make sure that all of your children survive during the winter, you can start kind of branching out to those pursuits that aren't necessary for your survival. But now, like you said, the Renaissance a little bit more can be focused on art, a little bit more can be focused on this enlightened way of thinking. And so it's not just from a health perspective, things get better, but just from a societal standpoint, you are able to branch out to so many different disciplines.
And that's just part of it too. If you were just a serf that was working in a field and you had all of these other artisans or all of these different other trades that were doing things in town, and then all those other trades die out, and maybe you're tired of being a serf that works into the fields, and they have all of these openings to go be a public works worker within the city.
How would you like to apprentice for this? How would you like, and all of a sudden now you're like, I don't fucking farm the field anymore. I'm helping to build these things, or I'm a mason or some shit like that.
Yeah, you can go from being a serf just picking crops to being a mason to being a tin worker, something like that, to where you can raise your family's
just standard of living.
Yeah, your standard of living, but also like within this caste system that's starting to grow in the middle class, you can start working your way up that a lot faster because there's just less people.
It's the how everyone says I want better for my kids.
Yeah.
Used to be you were born into a serf family, your dad's a serf, you're a serf, your kids are going to be serfs. Now it's my father was a serf, but after the Black Death, he started kind of raising the quality of life. I know how to read at this, and that's probably not a good, because no one knew how to read at that point, but my father's no longer doing this, which means I no longer have to do this.
I'm a family of blacksmiths now.
Yeah.
We actually have something that raises us in society and pulls us out from this kind of like secondary overseer of a fief or somebody, a feudal lord.
It kind of broke that process of a form of slavery that was monetarily based.
Yeah.
You had it was essentially slavery because you had no other options, but you were just simply paid for it.
Indentured servitude.
Yes, exactly.
As we talked about earlier, we get this idea of quarantine. They were using it down in Italy, in Dubrovnik, in Croatia in 1377. So after the major issue with the Black Death, they had a 30-day isolation period that would then be looked at as extended to 40 days, probably because it was sneaking back in a little bit. They're like, let's
Not
give
long
it
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 more days should be good. 40 days, the Italian word quarantino is where we get quarantine. And religion it plays a part in everything. But at the same time, this wasn't just exclusive to non-religious people and to the parishes out there. You had small monasteries and convents that would have to close because all of the monks died.
You are literally a building where you have everyone living within close proximity in very simplistic conditions. And I think this probably did cause the combination of losing a lot of these people of the cloth that were the people going out and kind of spreading the word and doing all that kind of stuff. When you don't have those people in your ear over here on this side of you, and there's all these other people that are in this Renaissance Enlightenment period and they're talking about this stuff, you're just kind of like, yeah, like, okay, talk to me more about that. It starts to spread a little bit more because you don't have that overarching umbrella of just being like, that's wrong, it's God. That's wrong, it's God. That guy's not whispering to you anymore. And all of a sudden it's like, you're making a lot of sense with this enlightenment shit. Let's go ahead and maybe try to grow this a little bit more.
I do like feeling this sense of self-determination. Like, I'm not just here to sin and repent and try to repent enough for the sins that I've committed to go to heaven. I can maybe feel a little less guilty about my daily life.
They were telling me the entire time this whole plague was going on that it was like God's vengeance and God's wrath. Like, that sounds kind of fucked up. I don't really think God would be doing that kind of stuff, but what you're saying actually sounds a little bit better.
Well, as you're saying, up to half of these parish churches lost their priests. So if you don't have those guys in there sitting on your shoulder whispering what you're supposed to be doing and that you're sinning, you're going to feel the freedom. Not to mention, if you are trying to get your grip back on these people, there's a certain amount of organization to try to get them back out into the communities. If you're trying...
You got to keep the flock. You got to keep the flock penned in.
Yeah, so you're playing a shell game and putting priests in different areas to try to bring the people back into you, but at the same time, somewhere else is suffering, and there becomes this disorganization where essentially nobody is getting what they need, and you start to see people leaning into different religious directions. You start to see this weakening of the Catholic Church that starts to contribute into the Protestant Reformation that happened in the 16th century. So there's a whole nother branch of religion that technically is born out of the Catholic Church not being reliable enough to save their people through the Black Death.
You lose your priest in town, but there's another guy that's a preacher from another religion. He's still standing.
He sits in his chair backwards.
Yeah, you with his hat on. Hey guys, what's up? What's the pastor's name from that 70s show? Pastor Dave?
Yeah.
What's up, guys? Hey, Pastor Dave. But no, you get these other people that are like, okay, well, he's talking about something that's different from my religion, but it's got God in it, and it's a little bit different. And I'm kind of have this God hole here where my current priest died from the plague, which he's saying is a divine thing, but this guy's still alive, and he's still talking about maybe this guy's onto something.
One of the coolest thoughts that kind of prevailed throughout this whole thing for me, and I'm sure it's because I have European blood, you have European blood. If you have European blood, you're still alive today, it means that your ancient relatives survived the Black Death. It's pretty cool.
That is actually pretty cool.
Pretty cool to know that you're one of the survivors.
That is. You're a survivor, Charlie. A couple other things this led to, which were huge in preventing this thing from, it did repeat, but not in the numbers that it did. And part of that comes from the development of like public sanitary systems. Basically people realizing that, hey, we maybe shouldn't just have shit running in the gutters of our street. We need to maybe clean this place up a bit. You also had, like you were saying, quarantine, processes of isolationism, hospitals with disinfection protocols that were being brought into play to try to go ahead and combat some of the spread of things like this. There were talks about it being a form of, and when you really boil it down, because it was a biological entity that developed on its own and killed all these people, it technically was a form of natural selection that did actually occur.
Yeah.
Because this thing essentially culled I hate fucking phrasing it like that, but it did cull a significant portion of the population that was susceptible to this. And that's kind of what human evolution has been like before. People were just, the leading cause of death was people killing each other. But when it was like this, it's a form of natural selection where something biologically created comes in and kind of clears stuff out. And then all of a sudden you have the society building back stronger, a little bit smarter. But I mean, if you trace stuff back, again, we were still, even at this point, when we're talking a little bit later, we're still 300 years away from germ theory.
Yeah, Louis Pasteur making that happen. And that's modern germ theory. There were steps in this process, but until you have a full modern understanding of something, there's just nothing that you can do about it. And that's why going through like the list of treatments, they're silly, they're funny, it's easy to make fun of them. But if you don't know, you're willing to try whatever you can.
We went back and forth so many times this week about trying to just like, hey, what do you think it was like? You're in a city, and imagine if you got to just be like, you were one of the people that was immune to it. You're just walking around and you're walking through just stacks of bodies and the fucking smell and just like, I don't know if it was when we were recording or not, you mentioned that they had to quit ringing the church bells.
Yeah.
That the Pope was like, stop ringing the church bells for funerals, because all it was the guys, I'm getting too many complaints from the crew of guys I have in there pulling on the rope because it's just constantly all day, every day, ding, 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 ding. No one gets any rest. No one has a feeling that there's anything but death going around.
Those bells ring for one reason.
Yes.
It's because somebody died.
We give them, everyone knows people are dying. We're given one ring at noon to signify the people that have died during the day, and that's it.
It's every kind of warfare that you can think of. And every kind of warfare, including actual war, because once you get through the big part of the Black Plague, 100 Years' War continues. They go back at it.
Yeah.
This is just a minor little period without...
This ain't going to stop us for the French from killing the English.
No, nothing will. But it's just every aspect of life is affected. And to think about like PTSD now, that's not just PTSD. That's just ruined your brain.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing else that you can do about it. Any little bit of hope that you're ever gleaming has a period of potentially 48 to 53 of just death and destruction. You haven't thought about anything for the last 5 years besides that.
Trying to break this down from like a mental perspective of like, how could these people possibly be effective? Every form of trauma that you could probably think of was experienced during this time. First of all, the constant fear that you were living in during this time when everyone was dying around you, just waiting for you or one of your loved ones. If your loved ones did get it, people lost their entire families, the survivor's guilt that you would probably have, like, why did I fucking survive through this? Like, why are my kids dead? Like, they did nothing. And yet I'm the only one that's still here. To just the simple visual aspect of walking around for a certain period of time in which it was common and everyday occurrence to pass the death wagon with arms and stuff hanging out of it and bodies and everything, and seeing the fucking plague doctors like it's goddamn Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights just constantly walking around the town and knowing what the significance of that is.
It's funny to see for 7 minutes in a Monty Python movie. Probably not too enjoyable to see.
For 7 years?
Day. Yeah. Every single day.
Yeah, just a completely fucking bonkers period of history.
But again, we made it through it. This shows that we'll do 1918, we'll do the influenza eventually, and all of that kind of thing, but we're pretty resilient people.
It also shows the fucking nature is king or queen, however you want to fucking look at it, because when it comes down to it, there's not shit we can do in some circumstances. We're better prepared today to handle stuff. Stuff still can fucking shut down the world. That was evident 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. But, you know, this is just something to show that, like, there's plenty of stuff out there that'll kill us on its own. We don't need to speed the process up by trying to just fucking kill each other all the time.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah, let's all keep trying to keep Mother Nature happy instead of fight each other.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man, you got anything else?
Nah, I think this is good. This was a fun first dip into a world of disease.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.